Before he ever touched an engine, Henry Ford took apart a pocket watch. He laid time on a table, gear by gear, and learned something dangerous. If you can rebuild a watch, you can rebuild a world. A few years later, he would rebuild work into seconds. And those seconds would become a river carrying America forward and washing something old away. Because this isn't just the story of a car. It's the story of how a farm boy who hated farming built the machine that replaced the farm itself. How did a farm boy who hated farming build the machine that destroyed the farm? Chapter 1. The Sound of Horses. Picture a boy lying in bed on a Michigan farm in the 1870s listening, not to silence. There was no silence on a farm, but to the particular music of work. The creak of leather harnesses, the low snorting breath of draft horses in their stalls, the rhythm of his father's boots crossing the yard before dawn, and underneath it all, the sound he would spend his life trying to escape, the endless, patient plodding of hooves against earth. His name was Henry Ford, and he hated farming with a clarity that frightened him. It wasn't the work itself, exactly. He could work. He would prove that later, with a ferocity that would exhaust men half his age. What he hated was the waiting. Waiting for spring, waiting for rain, waiting for crops to decide whether they would grow or fail, waiting for horses to rest, because horses always needed rest. The farm demanded patience, and Henry Ford had none. His father, William, had come from Ireland with dreams that fit neatly into soil and season. He'd built a solid farmhouse in Dearborn, a township west of Detroit, and he expected at his eldest son to inherit not just the land but the life. The assumption sat between them like a fence neither one acknowledged. William would gesture at the fields and see continuity. Henry would look at the same horizon and see a trap. But the boy learned to hide his restlessness. He did his chores. He walked behind the plow. He learned to read the sky for weather and the soil for mood. And at night, lying in that bed, listening to those horses, he taught himself to imagine a different kind of motion, faster, mechanical, independent of muscle and mood, something that didn't need to rest. There was a world beyond the farm. He knew this because once a month, his father would hitch the wagon and take the family into Detroit. 7 miles. An hour and a half if the roads were good, longer if they weren't. And in those trips, compressed into the slow rhythm of horse-drawn time, Henry Ford learned the mathematics of his obsession. Netchin, 7 miles should not take 90 minutes. Detroit in the 1870s was a city becoming something larger than itself. Factories were rising along the river. Machine shops threw sparks into the evening air. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal mixed with the older smells of tanneries and breweries. It was a scent Henry associated with possibility. On the farm, things grew, or they didn't. In the city, things were built. There was a difference. He would stand outside the shop windows. His mother had to pull him away, staring at the tools and mechanisms on display. Gears and springs and things whose purpose he could only guess at. He memorized shapes. He invented functions. He went home and tried to recreate what he'd seen using whatever he could find. Wire, wood, pieces of broken equipment his father had discarded. His mother, Mary, understood something in him that his father didn't. She gave him a corner of the house for his projects. She didn't ask why a boy needed to take apart a clock or reassemble a music box. She recognized the hunger. When he was 12, she gave him a small workbench, and he treated it like other boys might treat a rifle or a horse of their own, as the first tool of independence. But Mary Ford died when Henry was 13, and the farm became a different kind of prison after that. His father grew quieter. The house felt larger and colder. The chores continued because chores always continued, but the rhythm was broken. Henry threw himself into his mechanical projects with something closer to desperation now. He fixed watches for neighbors. He built small steam engines from scrap. He spent hours in the tool shed his mother had implicitly given him permission to occupy, and his father let him stay there because grief makes people generous in unexpected ways. The horses still needed feeding. The fields still needed plowing. But the boy who did these things was already leaving, even as his body remained. At night, he still listened to the sound of hooves. But now he was calculating. How much force would it take to replace them? What kind of engine could pull a plow faster, longer, without complaint? How much would it weigh? How would you fuel it? How would you control it? He didn't have answers yet, but he had the questions, and the questions were enough to keep him awake. Years later, when he was the richest man in America, when his name was on millions of cars and his factories ran day and night, someone asked him about those early years on the farm. What did he remember most? And Henry Ford, who rarely spoke about his childhood with anything like sentiment, said this. He remembered lying awake, listening to his father's horses, and knowing with absolute certainty that there had to be a better way, not just for him, for everyone who was trapped by the speed of animals and the patience of soil. He would build that better way. He would force it into existence with a stubbornness that matched his father's, though aimed at a different horizon. He would make motion cheap and fast and available to people who had never imagined they could outrun a horse. But first he had to leave the farm. And to do that, he needed to understand time itself. Chapter 2. The Pocket Watch. The watch arrived in his hand on a summer afternoon in 1876, handed over by a family friend who thought a clever boy might be able to fix it. Henry Ford was 13 years old. The watch was broken. He had never opened a watch before. He took it anyway. There's a moment in some lives when the future announces itself, not with clarity, but with a small object that changes the angle of everything that follows. For Henry Ford, it was this: a gold-plated pocket watch, silent and useless, containing a mystery he didn't yet have the language to describe. He brought it to his workbench. He found the smallest screwdriver he'd made. He'd been making his own tools by then, filing down nails and scraps of metal, and he opened the case. What he saw was a universe, not the face of the watch, with its clean numbers and its promise of measured time. He already understood that part. What stunned him was the back of the face, the intricate machinery of springs and gears and jeweled bearings, all working in concert to create the illusion of smooth, inevitable motion. Nothing in this mechanism grew, nothing rested, nothing waited for rain or season or the mood of an animal. It simply moved, precisely, endlessly, as long as someone remembered to wind it. He stared at it for a long time. Then he began taking it apart. He worked slowly, placing each piece on a white cloth in the order he removed it. The mainspring, coiled tight with potential energy, the escape wheel with its delicate teeth, the balance wheel, oscillating in perfect rhythm, dozens of pieces, some so small he had to squint to see them, all of them essential. Remove one and the whole system failed. But together, arranged correctly, they transformed tension into time. It took him 3 hours to disassemble the watch completely. It took him another 2 to put it back together. When he wound it and held it to his ear, it ticked. He had not broken it. He had understood it. Word spread quickly in a small community. The Ford boy could fix watches. Neighbors began bringing him their broken timepieces, old family heirlooms that had stopped working, cheap watches bought from traveling salesmen that had never worked right. Henry fixed them all. He charged nothing, or next to nothing. What he wanted wasn't money. It was access to the mechanics of precision. Every watch taught him something. How to work with tools too small for farm hands. How to see systems instead of parts. How to understand that complexity wasn't the enemy of reliability. Sometimes it was the source of it. A pocket watch was fragile, yes, but it was also repeatable. You could take it apart 100 times, and it would always go back together the same way. There was no guesswork, no hoping for good weather, no waiting for something else to cooperate. This was the grammar of machines, and he was learning to read it. His father noticed the watches piling up. He didn't approve exactly, but he didn't forbid it either. William Ford had loved his wife, and his wife had encouraged the boy's strangeness. So he let it continue, though he made sure Henry still did his share of farm work. The compromise was unspoken, but clear. You can play with your toys, but you'll earn your keep. Henry accepted the terms. He plowed in the morning and repaired watches in the evening. He learned to function on less sleep. He discovered that exhaustion was negotiable if the work mattered enough. But the watches were teaching him something beyond mechanics. They were teaching him about scale. A pocket watch had perhaps 150 parts. Most of them were unique. Specific gears cut to specific sizes, fitted to specific functions. If one part broke, you had to make a new one by hand, matching it precisely to the original. It was beautiful work. It was also impossible to mass produce. Henry began to wonder, what if you designed the parts first and made them identical? What if you made 1,000 balance wheels, all exactly the same, and then assembled them into 1,000 watches? The watches wouldn't be unique anymore, but they'd be cheaper, faster to make, easier to repair. You could just swap out a broken part instead of crafting a new one. He didn't have the words for what he was imagining yet. Standardization, interchangeable parts, mass production. Those terms belonged to factories and engineers, and he was still just a boy on a farm, hunched over a workbench, thinking too much. But the idea had teeth, and it wouldn't let go. By the time he was 16, Henry Ford had a reputation. He was the best watch repairman in the township, maybe in the county. People came from miles away. He could have made a living at it, probably. Set up a shop in Detroit, hung a sign, spent the rest of his life bent over tiny gears and listening to the aristocratic tick of other people's time. But he didn't want to fix watches. He wanted to build something larger, something that moved. He started spending more time in Detroit, taking any excuse to make the trip. He'd volunteer to deliver goods for his father or visit relatives, anything that put him in the city for a few hours. And once there, he'd wander. Machine shops, foundries, the riverfront, where steam engines powered derricks and winches. He watched everything. He asked questions when he could, and when he couldn't, he just observed. Steam engines fascinated him. They were the opposite of pocket watches. Massive, crude, powerful. No delicate jeweled bearings, no hairspring precision. Just heat and pressure and pistons hammering away, transforming coal into motion. They were ugly and miraculous. And they didn't need to rest. One afternoon, walking home along a country road, Henry saw something that would redirect his life. A portable steam engine mounted on wheels, chugging along under its own power. It was pulling a threshing machine to a neighboring farm, moving at perhaps 2 miles per hour, belching black smoke and hissing steam. The operator waved. Henry stopped and stared. Here was the thing he'd been imagining. A machine that moved itself. Clumsy, yes. Slow, yes. But independent. It didn't wait for horses to be hitched or rested. It just went. He ran after it. He caught up and walked alongside, asking questions. The operator, surprised by the boy's intensity, stopped and showed him how it worked. The firebox, the boiler, the piston, the gears. Henry memorized everything. When he got home, he drew diagrams. He calculated pressures and volumes. He started building a small steam engine of his own, using scrap metal and parts cannibalized from broken farm equipment. His father watched this with something like resignation. The boy was not going to be a farmer. But what Henry Ford didn't tell his father What he barely admitted to himself yet was that steam engines weren't the final answer. They were too heavy, too slow, too hungry for fuel. They were a step in the right direction, but only a step. What he needed was something lighter, faster, something that could carry not just threshing machines, but people. Something that could take that 7-mile journey to Detroit and turn 90 minutes into 20. He didn't know what that machine would look like yet, but he knew this. It would be built from the logic of the pocket watch and the power of the steam engine. Precision and force, complexity and repeatability. It would be mechanical, it would be fast, and it would not wait for anything. The boy who hated the sound of horses was learning to hear a different rhythm, one measured not in hoofbeats, but in revolutions per minute. And once you learned to hear that rhythm, once you understood that time itself could be rebuilt with the right tools and the right obsession, you couldn't unhear it. The farm was already behind him. He just hadn't left yet. Chapter 3: The Quadricycle and the Midnight Streets. Detroit after midnight in 1896 is a different city than the one that conducts business in daylight. The factories are silent. The streetcars have stopped running. Gas lamps flicker at intersections, casting uncertain light on cobblestones still damp from an earlier rain. Most people are asleep. The ones who aren't, the night watchmen, the drunks stumbling home from taverns, the policemen walking their beats. These are the ones who will witness something new. Henry Ford pushes his machine out of the brick shed behind 58 Bagley Avenue. It's close to 4 in the morning. He's 32 years old, chief engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, married, with a young son sleeping in the apartment upstairs. He has a good job, a steady income, a future that makes sense to everyone who knows him. And he's about to risk all of it on 4 bicycle wheels and a gasoline engine. The machine? He'll call it the quadricycle later, when he needs a name that sounds less insane. Doesn't look like much. It's essentially a metal frame on 4 thin wheels, with a buggy seat mounted in the middle and a 2-cylinder engine hanging underneath. No body, no roof, no windshield. The steering is a tiller, like a boat. There are 2 speeds, fast and faster. There are no brakes, only a clutch you can disengage to slow down gradually, hoping momentum and friction will stop you before you hit something. It weighs 500 pounds. It cost him $800 to build, most of that his own money. Some borrowed from friends who believed in him or couldn't say no. It has no reverse gear because he ran out of time and resources. It is loud, and it smells like gasoline and hot metal, and it is the most beautiful thing he has ever made. His assistant, Jim Bishop, helps him push it into the alley. They've practiced this. The engine is already warm. Henry has been testing it inside the shed for the past hour, making final adjustments, checking the ignition timing, praying to whatever gods watch over men who build machines in secret at night. He climbs onto the seat. The springs creak under his weight. He adjusts the spark timing with a lever mounted near his right hand. He opens the fuel valve. He nods to Bishop. Bishop spins the flywheel. The engine catches on the 3rd try, coughing to life with a sound like nothing else on these streets. Not the clop of hooves, not the rumble of a streetcar, not the distant whistle of a train. This is mechanical percussion, rapid and insistent, a hammering rhythm that announces the future even if no one's awake to hear it. Henry engages the clutch. The quadricycle lurches forward. And he is moving under his own power, on a machine he built with his own hands, through streets that suddenly feel wider and more possible than they ever have before. The first drive lasts maybe 20 minutes. He stays in the alley initially, getting a feel for the steering, the acceleration, the way the thin wheels slip on wet cobblestones. Then he turns onto Bagley Avenue, and then onto Washington Boulevard, and suddenly he is out in the city proper, driving past darkened storefronts and empty sidewalks, the engine's racket echoing off brick walls. A policeman stops him at one point, more curious than concerned. What is that thing? Where are you going? Henry explains. He's testing a horseless carriage, officer. Completely safe. Just need to run it a bit to make sure everything works. The policeman stares at the machine, then at Henry, then shrugs and waves him on. There's no law against what Henry is doing, mostly because no one has imagined it needed to be illegal yet. Henry drives on. He takes it up to 20 miles per hour on a straight stretch, faster than he's ever moved under his own control. The wind hits his face. His hands grip the tiller. The engine screams, and the wheels blur, and for the first time in his life, Henry Ford feels like he has escaped velocity. Not just moving fast, moving at a speed that makes the world rearrange itself around you. This is what he's been chasing since he was a boy listening to horses. This exact sensation. Independence from animal rhythm. Freedom from the patience the earth demands. Speed as a form of liberation. He returns to Bagley Avenue as the sky is beginning to lighten. He parks the quadricycle in the alley, kills the engine, and sits there for a moment in the sudden silence. His hands are shaking. He's exhausted and exhilarated, and already thinking about what needs to be improved. The steering is too sensitive. The engine is too loud. He needs a better transmission, better brakes, a stronger frame. But it works. That's the essential thing. It works. Jim Bishop helps him push it back into the shed. They don't talk much. There's nothing to say that the machine hasn't already said. Henry goes upstairs, washes the grease off his hands, and lies down next to his wife, Clara, who has learned not to ask too many questions about where he's been. She knows. She's always known. She married a man who dreams in gears and pistons, and she's made her peace with it. Henry closes his eyes. He can still feel the vibration of the engine in his bones. The next morning, he goes to work at the Edison plant like nothing has happened. He spends the day managing electrical systems and attending meetings and doing all the things a chief engineer is supposed to do. And in the evenings, he returns to the shed and works on the quadricycle, making it better, making it faster, making it real. Word spreads quickly. Detroit in 1896 is not a large city, maybe 250,000 people, and a man driving a gasoline-powered machine through the streets at 4 in the morning is news. Newspapers send reporters. Curious onlookers start showing up at Bagley Avenue, hoping to see the contraption. Henry gives demonstrations. He takes people for rides. He explains the mechanics to anyone who'll listen, his voice calm and precise, the way you'd explain a pocket watch. Some people are impressed. Some are skeptical. Some think he's wasting his time and talent on a toy. But a few people see what he sees. They understand that this crude, noisy machine is not the point. The point is what it represents. A new kind of motion. A new relationship between people and distance. One of those people is Thomas Edison himself. Henry meets him at a convention of Edison executives later that year. He's been invited because of his position at the company, but also because people have heard about his horseless carriage, and Edison is curious. At a dinner, someone mentions Henry's machine, and Edison leans across the table and starts asking questions. What kind of engine? How much does it weigh? What's the fuel consumption? How do you start it? Henry answers, and as he answers, he realizes Edison is actually listening, not humoring him, not patronizing him, listening the way one engineer listens to another. When Henry finishes describing the quadricycle, Edison slams his fist on the table, not in anger, but in emphasis. "Young man," he says, "you have it. Keep at it. Electric cars must keep near to power stations. The storage battery is too heavy. Steam cars won't do either, for they have to have a boiler and fire. Your car is self-contained, carries its own power plant. No fire, no boiler, no smoke, and no steam. You have the thing. Keep at it. Years later, Henry Ford will call this the most important conversation of his life. Not because Edison told him something he didn't already know, but because Edison confirmed what he did know at a moment when confirmation mattered. He keeps at it. He builds a second car, better than the first. Then a third, better still. He starts thinking beyond the machine itself. If you can build one car, you can build 10. If you can build 10, you can build 100. And if you can build 100, maybe you can build enough that ordinary people, not just the wealthy, but mechanics and farmers and shopkeepers, maybe they could afford one too. But first, he needs capital, resources, a company. He needs to stop being a man with a machine in a shed and become something larger. The quadricycle still exists, by the way. Henry Ford kept it his entire life, even after he'd built millions of better cars. He'd bring it out sometimes, drive it around, show it to visitors. He understood what it represented. Not his best work, not his most important work, but his first work. The thing that proved the idea wasn't crazy. On those midnight streets in 1896, steering by tiller through a sleeping city, he hadn't known if anyone else would ever want what he was building. He just knew he wanted it. Needed it. Had to make it real, or spend the rest of his life wondering, what if? The wondering was over. Now came the harder part. Making everyone else want it too. Chapter 4. Failure is a kind of education. The Detroit Automobile Company opens for business in August of 1899 with $5,000 in capital, a small factory building, and Henry Ford as chief engineer. It will be out of business in less than 2 years. Henry will walk away from the ruins with nothing but debt and a reputation as someone who promises more than he can deliver. This is his first company. It will not be his last failure. But here's what the investors don't understand yet. What Henry himself is only beginning to learn. Failure in manufacturing is not like failure in farming. On a farm, failure means the crop dies and you wait another year and hope for better weather. In manufacturing, failure is information. Every broken part, every design that doesn't work, every production delay, that these are not disasters, they are data. Henry Ford is about to get a very expensive education. The problem with the Detroit Automobile Company is not that Henry can't build cars. He can build cars. He's built several by now, each one better than the last. The problem is that he can't build them fast enough, or cheap enough, or consistently enough to make a viable business. Each car is essentially a custom project. Each one requires him to solve the same problems over again. Each one takes weeks to complete and costs more than they're charging customers, which means every sale loses money. The investors are patient at first. These things take time, they tell themselves. Ford is talented. He just needs to work out the kinks. But the kinks don't work themselves out. Production slows. Costs rise. The cars that do get completed are fine, well-built, reliable. But there aren't enough of them. Henry spends most of his time on the factory floor, obsessing over details, rebuilding components that don't meet his standards, refusing to ship cars that aren't perfect. Perfection, the investors realize too late, is expensive. By early 1901, they've had enough. The company is dissolved. The assets are liquidated. The investors take their losses and move on. Henry keeps a few tools and some blueprints, and the knowledge that he's just humiliated himself in front of everyone who ever believed in him. He's 37 years old. He has a wife and a son, and no job and a reputation as a brilliant engineer who can't run a company. Some men would stop here, accept that building cars is a hobby, not a business. Go back to a steady job at Edison or some other established firm. Make peace with the fact that not every dream is meant to be realized. Henry Ford. is not some men. What he learns from the failure of the Detroit Automobile Company is this: investors want immediate returns, but good manufacturing requires patience. Not the patience of farming, waiting for nature to cooperate, but the patience of systematic improvement. You have to be willing to build something badly first, learn from it, and build it better the second time, and the third time, and the fourth. But investors don't fund fourth attempts. They fund sure things. So Henry needs to become a sure thing. He decides to build race cars. This seems insane to everyone who knows him. Race cars are expensive, dangerous, and completely impractical. They have nothing to do with his stated goal of building affordable transportation for ordinary people. But Henry understands something about public attention. Nobody cares about a careful engineer building sensible vehicles in a factory. Everybody cares about speed records and competitions and machines that go faster than anything has ever gone before. If he can win races, he can get attention. If he can get attention, he can get new investors. If he can get new investors, he can try again. He builds a car he calls Sweepstakes, a massive stripped-down racing machine with a 2-cylinder engine that produces 26 horsepower. It's loud and crude and terrifying to drive. Henry tests it himself, pushing it to speeds approaching 70 miles per hour on dirt tracks outside Detroit, learning what happens to steering and control when you double and triple the velocities human beings are accustomed to. In October 1901, he enters Sweepstakes in a race at the Grosse Pointe track. His main competition is Alexander Winton, a professional racer and established automobile manufacturer driving a more sophisticated machine. Winton is the favorite. Henry is the amateur with the weird car and the failed company. The race is 10 laps, 10 miles total. Winton takes the lead immediately. His car is faster on the straightaways, better engineered, more professional in every way. Henry trails behind, eating dust, waiting. But Winton's engine begins to overheat. On the 7th lap, he starts slowing down. Henry doesn't speed up. His engine is already running at maximum capacity, but his car was built heavier, cruder, with more tolerance for punishment. It doesn't overheat. It just keeps hammering forward at the same relentless pace. On the 9th lap, Henry passes Winton. On the 10th, he crosses the finish line first. The crowd goes wild, not because Henry Ford is famous. He's not yet, but because everyone loves an underdog, and everyone loves speed. And Henry has just beaten a professional racer in a car he built himself, with parts scrounged from machine shops and borrowed money. The next day, newspapers carry the story. Henry Ford wins race in home-built car. Suddenly, he's not a failed entrepreneur anymore. He's a winner, an innovator, a man who builds machines that perform when it matters. New investors appear. One of them is a lumber baron named Alexander Malcolmson, who has money and ambition and a willingness to take risks. Together, they form a new company. Not the Detroit Automobile Company, that name is tainted now, but something fresh. They call it the Henry Ford Company. This one will last slightly longer than the first, about 4 months. The problem this time is not production, it's control. Malcolmson wants Henry to focus on building expensive cars for wealthy customers, the kind of vehicles that generate immediate profit. Henry wants to keep experimenting, keep refining, keep working toward his vision of a cheap, simple car for everyone. They fight. Henry digs in. So do the investors. By March 1902, the situation is impossible. Henry resigns, or he's forced out. Depending on who tells the story, both versions are true. The Henry Ford Company continues without him. They bring in a new engineer, rename the company Cadillac, and go on to great success, building luxury automobiles. Henry gets $900 in severance and the rights to continue using his own name. 2 companies. 2 failures. He's now 38 years old, and has nothing to show for 5 years of work, except the knowledge of how not to run a business. But here's what's different now. He knows exactly what he wants to build. Not race cars, not luxury vehicles, not custom machines for wealthy eccentrics. He wants to build a car so simple, so reliable, so cheap to manufacture, that ordinary working people can afford it. A car that does for transportation what the pocket watch did for time, makes it accessible, democratic, inevitable. He just needs one more chance, one more group of investors willing to bet on a man who's already failed twice. He finds them in the summer of 1903. A coal dealer named Alexander Malcolmson, yes, the same one from before, because some people believe in second chances, agrees to fund one more attempt. They form a new company. This time they don't use Henry's name. They call it the Ford Motor Company. 12 investors, $28,000 in capital, a rented factory on Mack Avenue in Detroit, a handful of employees, and Henry Ford, third time lucky, betting everything on a design he calls the Model A. It's not the car he'll be remembered for. That's still 5 years away. But it's the car that proves he can do this. Build them efficiently, build them consistently, build them cheap enough that people will actually buy them. The first Model A is completed in July 1903. It costs $850. It has 2 cylinders, 8 horsepower, and a top speed of about 30 miles per hour. It's not fast. It's not fancy. But it works. And it's affordable. And within the first 15 months, the Ford Motor Company sells 1,700 of them. The company makes a profit. Not a huge profit, but enough. Enough to stay in business. Enough to hire more workers. Enough to start thinking about what comes next. Henry Ford has finally learned what the investors wanted him to learn. You have to deliver results before you can pursue visions. But he's also learned something the investors don't know yet. Once you deliver results, they'll let you pursue any vision you want. And his vision is becoming clearer. Not just a car, a system. A way of building that makes each car easier and cheaper to produce than the one before. A factory that runs like a pocket watch. Every part precisely fitted. Every motion planned. Every worker performing a specific task in a specific sequence. He's not there yet, but he's learning. And in manufacturing, if you're learning, you're not failing. You're just building the next version. The Detroit Automobile Company taught him that investors lose patience fast. The Henry Ford Company taught him that you can't serve 2 visions at once. Now the Ford Motor Company is teaching him the most important lesson of all. Control everything. Own the process. Never again let someone else decide what you're going to build or how you're going to build it. The failures are behind him now. The education is complete. What comes next is the car that will change everything, built by a man who finally understands that success in manufacturing isn't about building one perfect machine. It's about building the same good enough machine 1,000,000 times, faster and cheaper than anyone thought possible. But to do that, he'll need to rethink everything about how cars are made. And he'll need workers willing to do the same task over and over with a precision that would make a watchmaker proud and a monotony that would break most human spirits. He's thought about that problem too. He's already working on the solution. It will be the most famous wage in American history, and it will change labor relations forever. But first, the car. Chapter 5. The Model T and the Democracy of Motion, October 1st, 1908. The Ford Motor Company announces a new automobile. They call it the Model T, and the initial price is $825, which is not cheap, but not outrageous either. It's about twice what an average worker makes in a year. The company expects to sell maybe a few thousand units. They have no idea they've just designed the car, that it will put America on wheels. Henry Ford is 45 years old. He's been building cars for 12 years, running the Ford Motor Company for 5. He's tried and abandoned Models A through S. Some never made it past the prototype stage. Some sold in small numbers. All of them teaching him something about what works and what doesn't. The Model T is not his first car. It's not even his best car, in terms of speed, or luxury, or innovation. But it's the right car. And in manufacturing, being right matters more than being first. The design is almost aggressively simple. 4 cylinders, 20 horsepower, a planetary transmission with just 2 forward speeds. No water pump. The engine cooling system relies on simple thermosiphon circulation. No fuel pump. Gravity feeds gasoline from a tank mounted under the front seat. No oil pump. Splash lubrication handles everything. Fewer parts means fewer things to break. Fewer things to break means lower repair costs. Lower repair costs means farmers and shopkeepers can actually afford to own one. The body sits high off the ground, nearly 10 inches of clearance, because American roads in 1908 are terrible. Mostly dirt, rutted, muddy in spring, dusty in summer, frozen in winter. The Model T is built to handle all of it. It's not elegant, but elegance is not the point. The point is to go anywhere and survive the journey. Ford makes another decision that seems minor, but isn't. He builds it strong enough to take punishment, light enough to not get stuck, and simple enough that an owner can repair it with basic tools. You don't need a specialist mechanic for a Model T. You need a wrench and common sense. This matters in a country where the nearest mechanic might be 50 miles away. The first Model Ts roll out of the Piquette Avenue plant in Detroit that fall. They're painted red or blue or gray or green, whatever colors are available from suppliers. Henry stands on the factory floor and watches the first cars being assembled, each one still built largely by hand, teams of workers gathering parts and bolting them together at stationary workstations. It's faster than the old custom-build approach, but it's still slow. Each car takes about 12 hours to complete. The factory can maybe produce 25 cars a day, if everything goes perfectly, which it rarely does. But the orders start coming in. Faster than expected, then much faster than expected. By the end of 1908, the factory has a backlog. By spring of 1909, customers are waiting months for delivery. Henry increases production, hires more workers, expands the factory. It's not enough. Demand keeps climbing. This is not a problem most manufacturers have. Usually the challenge is convincing people to buy what you're making. Ford's challenge is making enough of what people already want. It's a better problem to have, but it's still a problem. He starts obsessing over efficiency. Every minute wasted in production is a car not delivered, a customer kept waiting, money left on the table. He walks the factory floor with a stopwatch, timing how long each operation takes. He watches workers carry parts from one station to another and thinks about the wasted motion. He sees men waiting for components and thinks about the wasted time. There's a better way to do this. There has to be. He studies other industries, meat, packing plants, where animal carcasses move along overhead rails past butchers who each make a single cut, flour mills, where grain flows through a series of machines, each one performing a specific operation, breweries, with their careful choreography of timing and sequence. These aren't factories, they're systems. The product moves, the workers stay in place. Each person does one thing over and over, and the accumulated effect is speed beyond anything possible when workers have to move around. Henry starts experimenting. What if instead of bringing parts to the car, you brought the car past the parts? What if instead of each worker building a complete assembly, each worker added just one component? What if the whole factory became a pocket watch, every gear turning at the right speed, every part arriving at the exact moment it's needed? In 1910, he moves production to a massive new plant in Highland Park, a purpose-built facility designed around his emerging ideas about manufacturing flow. It's 4 stories tall, nearly 1 million square feet, with huge windows that flood the workspace with natural light. But the real innovation isn't the building. It's what happens inside. Ford begins breaking down the assembly process into smaller and smaller tasks. Installing an engine used to be one job. Now it's 30 jobs. One worker bolts on the oil pan, another attaches the timing gears, another installs the pistons, each one performing the same operation hundreds of times a day. It sounds mind-numbing. It is mind-numbing, but it's fast. In 1913, he takes the final step. He installs a moving assembly line. The first one is for flywheel magnetos, small electrical components that provide ignition spark. Previously, one skilled worker would assemble an entire magneto in about 20 minutes. Ford breaks the job into 29 separate operations and spaces workers along a moving belt. The magneto moves past each worker at a steady pace, and each worker performs their single task as it passes. Time to complete one magneto, 5 minutes. He applies the same principle to the engine assembly, then to the chassis, then to final assembly. By early 1914, the entire Model T production process has been transformed into a continuous flow of moving parts and stationary workers. A car that used to take 12 hours to build now takes 93 minutes. The implications are staggering, not just for Ford, but for manufacturing everywhere. Henry has not invented the assembly line. He borrowed ideas from many sources and synthesized them into something new. But he's the first to apply it at this scale, with this level of integration, and the results speak for themselves. In 1910, Ford builds about 19,000 Model Ts. In 1914, after the assembly line is fully implemented, Ford builds more than 300,000. The price drops from $825 to $540, then to $490, then to $360. Henry passes the savings directly to customers, which horrifies his investors, but achieves exactly what he wants. The Model T becomes affordable to the kind of people who build it. A factory worker making $5 a day, which is high wages in 1914, can now afford a Model T with about 3 months' salary. Compare that to buying a horse and buggy, which might cost $200, plus ongoing feed and stable costs. The economics suddenly favor the car, and people buy them. Farmers buy them to get to town faster. Doctors buy them to reach patients in distant rural areas. Salesmen buy them to expand their territories. Young people buy them to escape their parents' watchful eyes. The Model T becomes more than a product. It becomes infrastructure, freedom, possibility. Henry understands this better than anyone. He's not selling transportation. He's selling the same thing he wanted as a boy, lying in bed listening to horses. The ability to go anywhere, anytime, without asking permission from animals or weather, or the limitations of muscle and hoof. By 1918, half the cars in America are Model Ts. By 1927, when production finally ends, Ford will have built more than 15 million of them. 15 million identical cars, all painted black after 1914, because black paint dries fastest and speed matters more than choice. Henry famously says customers can have any color they want, as long as it's black. People repeat this as a joke. He means it as efficiency. But there's a cost to all this speed. And it's being paid by the men on the assembly line, the same workers who benefit from higher production. More cars mean more jobs, better wages, more stability, are also the ones enduring the monotony. Stand in place. Perform the same motion. Do it again. Do it 500 times a day. Do it 6 days a week. Do it until your hands hurt and your back aches and you dream about the motion in your sleep. Nobers, Turnover at the Highland Park plant is astronomical. In 1913, Ford has to hire more than 50,000 workers just to maintain a workforce of about 14,000. People quit constantly. The work is too boring, too repetitive, too inhuman. You can make anything efficient if you're willing to treat workers like components in a machine. But components don't quit. Henry knows this is a problem. He doesn't know how big a problem until his managers sit him down and show him the numbers. The constant hiring and training are expensive. Experienced workers are leaving faster than new ones can be trained. Quality is suffering. Something has to change. Henry Ford makes a decision that will make him famous far beyond the automotive industry. He's going to change not how cars are built, but how workers are paid. It's early January 1914. The assembly line is humming. Production numbers are climbing, and Henry is about to do something that will shock the business world and transform American labor forever. He's going to make the people who build Model Ts able to afford them. Not eventually. Not theoretically. Actually. The announcement will come in a few days, but already walking through the Highland Park plant, watching the assembly line move at its relentless mechanical pace, he can see it clearly. This is the future. Not just fast manufacturing, not just cheap cars, but a complete reimagining of the relationship between workers and the things they build. The democracy of motion doesn't just mean everyone can buy a car. It means everyone who builds one can afford the machine they're making. The farm boy who hated waiting for horses has created a system where speed generates prosperity. At least, that's the plan. Whether the plan actually works for the workers, whether it breaks them or lifts them, that's about to be tested at a scale no one has attempted before. The assembly line is running. Now comes the part where Henry Ford tries to keep human beings on it. Chapter 6. The $5 Day. January 5th, 1914. Henry Ford calls a press conference at the Highland Park plant. Reporters arrive expecting the usual. Production numbers? Maybe a new model announcement. Something about engineering improvements. What they get instead is news that will make headlines around the world and change labor relations in America forever. Ford announces that starting immediately, the company will pay workers a minimum of $5 for an 8-hour day. There's silence in the room. Then someone asks Henry to repeat the number, because surely they misheard. $5 a day? For factory work, the industry standard is about $2.30 for a 9-hour day. Ford is proposing to more than double wages and reduce hours. The math doesn't make sense. The shareholders will revolt. The company will go bankrupt. This has to be a publicity stunt. Henry Ford does not do publicity stunts. He does math. Here's the calculation he's made. Turnover is costing the company millions. In 1913, he hired 52,000 workers to maintain a force of 14,000. That's a 370% turnover rate. Every time a worker quits, Ford loses the investment in training. Every inexperienced worker on the line makes mistakes, slows production, reduces quality. The real cost of low wages isn't the wages, it's everything else. But there's more to it than efficiency. Henry has been walking the factory floor, watching men perform the same motions thousands of times a day. He's seen the fatigue, the blank stares, the way workers stumble out at the end of a shift, looking more used up than any machine in the plant. He's also noticed something else. Very few of them can afford the product they're building. They make Model Ts, but they ride the streetcar home. This bothers him, not out of sentiment. Henry Ford is not a sentimental man, but out of logic. If the people building cars can't afford cars, then you're limiting your own market. If you pay them enough to buy what they make, you turn workers into customers. You create a virtuous cycle. Higher wages mean more consumption, which means more demand, which means more production. which means more jobs. It's not generosity, it's systems thinking. But when he announces the $5 day, the world hears generosity. Newspapers call him a socialist, a radical, a traitor to his class. The Wall Street Journal writes that he's injecting spiritual principles into a field where they do not belong, by which they mean he's giving workers more than the minimum necessary to keep them alive. Business leaders are horrified. If Ford can pay $5 a day, workers everywhere will demand the same. He's undermining the entire wage structure. Labor leaders are suspicious too. Nothing in their experience suggests capitalists give away money without strings attached. There must be a catch. And there is, though not the one they expect. The catch is this: not everyone qualifies. To receive the $5 wage, workers must meet certain standards. They must have worked at Ford for at least 6 months. They must be over 22 years old or younger if supporting a family. And they must pass inspection by Ford's newly created sociological department. This is where Henry's plan gets complicated. He believes the $5 wage should improve not just workers' finances, but their lives. So he dispatches a small army of investigators, later about 200 of them, to visit workers' homes and assess whether they're living properly. Are they clean? Sober? Thrifty? Do they send their children to school? Do they keep borders, which Ford opposes because he thinks it leads to immoral behavior? Do they drink? Gamble? Waste money on foolishness? Workers who fail inspection are put on probation. They still get the old wage, around $2.30 a day, while investigators work with them to improve their habits. Only once they demonstrate proper living do they receive the full $5. It's paternalistic, invasive, built on assumptions about morality and respectability that reflect Henry's rural Protestant upbringing more than any worker's actual needs. Immigrant workers, in particular, are scrutinized. The investigators check whether they're learning English, whether they're Americanizing properly. Ford offers English classes at the plant, and graduation involves a ceremony where workers dressed in native clothing enter a giant mock steamship labeled Melting Pot and emerge wearing American suits, waving American flags. The symbolism is not subtle. And yet, despite the conditions, despite the surveillance, workers flood to Detroit. The morning after the announcement, 10,000 men show up at the Highland Park plant, hoping to be hired. The crowd grows violent when they realize there are only a few hundred openings. Fire hoses are turned on the mob in sub-freezing weather. Men are trampled. Police are called. For days afterward, thousands of workers arrive every morning, desperate for a chance at the $5 wage. Because here's what the critics miss. For most workers, $5 a day is life-changing. It's the difference between renting a room and owning a house, between hoping your children can stay in school and knowing they can, between one set of clothes and 3, between visiting the doctor and hoping the pain goes away on its own. The surveillance is intrusive, yes. The moral expectations are insulting, yes, but the money is real. And Henry delivers on the other part of the promise too. Turnover plummets. By the end of 1914, it's down to about 50%. By 1915, it's negligible. Workers still hate the assembly line. The monotony doesn't disappear just because you're paid better, but they stay. They endure. They learn to live with the boredom because the wage makes it bearable. Ford's competitors watch this experiment with growing alarm. If he can afford to pay $5 a day, either he's lying about his profits or he's found some efficiency they haven't. Both options are disturbing. Some try to match the wages. Most can't. Their production methods are still too slow, too expensive. Only Ford has the assembly line running fast enough to make high wages profitable. This, more than anything, proves Henry's point. The $5 day isn't charity. It's the dividend from speed. The faster you build, the cheaper each unit becomes. The cheaper each unit, the more you can afford to pay workers. The more you pay workers, the better they perform, and the more they can buy. It's a system that feeds itself, as long as production keeps accelerating. And production does. In 1914, Ford builds 308,000 Model Ts. In 1915, he builds 500,000. The plant runs day and night. New workers arrive faster than they can be trained. The sociological department investigators can barely keep up with home visits. The whole enterprise has the feeling of an experiment conducted at dangerous velocity. Success and catastrophe, both equally possible. Henry walks the factory floor less often now. He's too busy managing the company's growth, fighting with shareholders who hate the $5 day, planning new plants, expanding production capacity. But when he does visit the line, he still stops and watches the workers. Still times operations with his stopwatch. Still looks for wasted motion, wasted time, anything that could be done faster. He sees men who can now afford the cars they build. He sees a system that works. Not perfectly, not without cost, but works. He's created a machine for making machines, and it's running better than anyone thought possible. The pocket watch has become a factory. The factory has become an engine of prosperity. But there's something else he sees too, though he might not admit it. He sees men moving at the pace of the line, rather than the line moving at the pace of men. He sees human beings synchronized to mechanical rhythm. He's solved the problem of turnover. He's made the work bearable. He hasn't made it human. Maybe that's not possible. Maybe speed and humanity are incompatible. Maybe this is just what progress looks like. Faster, richer, more productive, and somehow more hollow. The Model T gives people freedom to go anywhere. The assembly line that builds it traps workers in repetitive motion. Both things are true. Both are Henry Ford's legacy. In the years ahead, labor unions will point to Ford's factory as evidence of what's wrong with industrial capitalism. The monotony, the surveillance, the way workers become extensions of machines. Ford himself will become increasingly hostile to unions, seeing them as interference in his system, obstacles to efficiency. But on January 5, 1914, standing in front of those reporters, announcing the $5 day, Henry Ford believes he's found the answer. Not just to turnover, not just to wages, but to the question of how you build a better world. You make things faster and cheaper. You share the profits. You turn workers into customers. You create abundance. It's a beautiful theory. And for a while, for a few years maybe, it almost looks like it's working. The factory runs. The wages are paid. The Model Ts roll off the line at a pace that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Henry Ford has done what he set out to do. He's made motion democratic. He's made the car affordable. He's proven that assembly line production can benefit workers and owners alike. The boy who hated the sound of horses has built a system where millions of people can escape that sound forever. The engineer who took apart pocket watches has built a factory that runs with the same precise, inevitable rhythm. The man who failed twice has succeeded beyond even his own expectations. And yet, there's something coming that Henry Ford won't be able to assemble, line his way out of. Something that moves faster than production quotas and pays less attention to his theories about progress. Something that will prove that speed is not enough, that efficiency has limits, that the same manufacturing system that built cars can build weapons just as easily. The world is about to go to war, and Henry Ford, who believes machines should liberate people, is about to learn what machines actually do when nations decide they need them for killing instead of driving. Chapter 7. The Assembly Line and the Cost of Speed. Picture the Highland Park plant in 1916, 2 years into the $5 day, 3 years into the moving assembly line. It's 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in February. The factory is already roaring. 15,000 workers are inside, distributed across 1,000,000 square feet of floor space, each person performing a task that takes between 30 seconds and 2 minutes to complete. A Model T chassis moves past on an overhead conveyor every 45 seconds. By the end of the day, this factory will produce more than 1,000 cars. This is the most efficient manufacturing operation in human history. It's also one of the loneliest. The worker at Station 47, let's call him Stefan, though his name doesn't matter, because at Station 47 everyone does the same job, installs the left rear wheel. Every 45 seconds, a chassis arrives. He lifts the wheel from a stack at his left, positions it on the hub, starts 4 lug nuts by hand, tightens them with a pneumatic wrench, returns the wrench to its hook, and the chassis moves on. 45 seconds later, another chassis arrives. He does it again, and again, and again, 533 times per 9-hour shift, accounting for a 30-minute lunch break. Stefan has been doing this job for 8 months. He's very good at it. He can install a wheel in 37 seconds now, which gives him 8 seconds of rest between cars. This is luxurious compared to some stations, where the time allowance is so tight that workers have to move while the chassis is still in motion, walking alongside it, performing their task on the fly, running back to catch the next one. He makes $5 a day. This has changed his life. He's renting a house now instead of a room. He's learning English at the Ford-sponsored classes. His wife no longer takes in laundry. His children stay in school. By every measure that matters, income, housing, opportunity, he's better off than he was 2 years ago. And yet, something is breaking inside him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small increments, worn away by repetition, by the relentless pace of the line, by the sheer grinding monotony of doing the same motion 533 times a day, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year. He dreams about wheels now. In his sleep, he reaches for lug nuts that aren't there. His hands make the tightening motion even when he's sitting at dinner. His body has memorized the job so completely that it continues performing it even when his mind is elsewhere, which is most of the time. You can't stay mentally present while installing wheels for 9 hours. Your consciousness goes somewhere else. The body remains, moving in rhythm with the line. This is what Henry Ford has built. Not just a factory, a system for converting human beings into precision components. It works. It's profitable. And it's slowly erasing the interior life of everyone who serves it. Ford himself understands this, at least intellectually. He's said that the assembly line work requires no brain work. He means it as a positive, as evidence that the jobs are so simple, anyone can do them. But what sounds like accessibility is also a kind of violence. You're being paid to not think, to not innovate, to not exercise judgment or creativity, or any of the qualities that make work meaningful. Just perform the motion. Match the speed of the line. Become mechanical. No, the company keeps careful metrics on everything. Production rates, quality defects, injury reports. What they don't measure, what can't be measured, is the psychic cost. The way workers become hollow. The way men who were once farmers or craftsmen or shopkeepers who once decided when to work and how to work and what constituted a job well done are now reduced to fragments of a process they don't control and barely understand. Stefan installs left rear wheels. He has no idea who installs the right rear wheels. He's never seen a completed Model T roll off the end of the line. His relationship to the product is reduced to 4 lug nuts, torqued to a specific tightness, 533 times a day. And he's one of the lucky ones, because at least wheels are substantial. You can see them, feel them, understand what they do. Some workers spend their shifts installing cotter pins, or tightening a single bolt. or applying a dab of grease to a joint they can't even name. The jobs have been subdivided so completely that most workers couldn't build an entire car if you gave them all the parts and a month to figure it out. This is the logical endpoint of Henry Ford's obsession with efficiency. He's taken the pocket watch, where every part fits precisely into a complex whole, and he's distributed it across 15,000 people, each one responsible for a single gear, none of them understanding the mechanism they're building. It produces cars faster than anyone dreamed possible. It also produces human beings who are very good at one thing and increasingly incapable of anything else. The injuries are constant, not dramatic ones usually, not the kind that make newspapers, but repetitive strain injuries. Crushed fingers when concentration slips, burns from hot metal, respiratory problems from paint fumes and metal dust, deafness from the constant noise, the hammering of pneumatic tools, the roar of engines being tested, the screech of metal on metal. The factory is so loud that workers can't hear each other speak. They communicate in gestures and lip reading. The company provides medical care. This is progressive for the time. Most factories provide nothing, but the medical care is focused on getting workers back on the line as quickly as possible. Injured? Here's a bandage. Try to favor the other hand. Can't hear? You don't need to hear to install wheels. Lungs hurt? Take a few deep breaths during lunch. The sociological department investigators still make their rounds, checking on workers' home lives, offering advice on thrift and sobriety and proper American living. But they're overwhelmed. There are too many workers, too many shifts, too much turnover despite the $5 day. The system that was supposed to improve workers' lives has grown too large to maintain its own ideals. Some workers crack. They walk off the line in the middle of a shift and don't come back. Some get into fights, the frustration and fatigue finding outlets in violence. Some just slow down, performing their tasks with deliberate lethargy, a form of resistance that the foreman can't quite prove but know is happening. The line is designed to move at a specific pace. When workers sabotage that pace, even subtly, the whole system stutters. Ford responds by tightening control, more foremen, more supervision, more rules about bathroom breaks and talking, and any behavior that might slow production. The factory becomes less like a workplace and more like a prison, one where the sentence is served in 45-second intervals. And yet, the workers keep coming, because $5 a day is still $5 a day. Because jobs are scarce, and Ford's factory is hiring. Because for all its dehumanizing efficiency, it's still better than the alternatives. Farms where you work from dawn to dusk for subsistence wages. Small shops where you're at the mercy of a boss's mood. Mines where you die young from dust or cave-ins. This is the paradox Henry Ford has created. The assembly line is both liberation and trap. It pays well enough that workers can afford the product they're building. Stefan could buy a Model T with about 3 months' wages, which is remarkable. But it breaks them in ways that money can't fix. You can own a car and still hate the 45 seconds that repeat 500 times a day. Both things are true. Henry walks through the factory sometimes, though less frequently now. When he does, he sees the numbers. Production up, costs down, quality consistent, wages paid. The system working exactly as designed. What he might not see, what he might choose not to see, is Stefan at Station 47, installing wheels with the precision of a machine and the deadness of someone who's forgotten what it feels like to make something from beginning to end. Or maybe he sees it and considers it an acceptable cost. Progress always costs something. The question is whether what you're building is worth what you're destroying. Henry believes it is. The Model T has given millions of people freedom of movement. The assembly line has made that possible. If some workers find the work soul-crushing, well, they're free to leave. That they mostly don't. suggests the trade-off is worth it. But there's another cost coming, one that Henry doesn't anticipate. The same system that builds cars so efficiently can build weapons just as efficiently. The same assembly line that democratized motion can militarize it. The same precision that puts a Model T together in 93 minutes can put a bomber together in hours instead of weeks. In 1916, Europe is tearing itself apart. The war that started 2 years ago was supposed to be over by Christmas. It's now grinding through its second year, consuming men and material at a rate that defies comprehension. Millions dead, millions more wounded. And the appetite for weapons, guns, ammunition, trucks, aircraft, grows every day. American factories are already supplying the Allies. Not officially, the U.S. is still neutral, but through private contracts. Steel mills, chemical plants, textile factories, all running at capacity to feed the European war machine. And soon, very soon, someone is going to realize that Henry Ford's assembly line, the system that revolutionized manufacturing, that proved you could build complex products faster and cheaper than anyone thought possible, could revolutionize warfare too. Henry Ford is about to face a question he never expected to confront. The machines he built were supposed to liberate people, give them speed, mobility, the ability to escape the constraints that trapped previous generations. What happens when those same machines, built with those same methods, are turned toward destruction? What happens when the assembly line goes to war? Stefan doesn't think about any of this. He's at Station 47, installing the left rear wheel, watching the chassis arrive every 45 seconds. He doesn't know that in a few years he might be installing wheels on military trucks instead of Model Ts. He doesn't know that the system that employed him will employ him in a different capacity, building tools for killing instead of fuel for driving. Right now, all he knows is the rhythm. Lift, position, tighten, release. 45 seconds. Again. The line never stops. The work never ends. And somewhere in the distance, too far away to hear over the factory noise, the world is preparing for a war that will require everything this system can produce. Speed, it turns out, is neutral. You can use it to visit your family in the next state, or you can use it to deliver explosives to enemy trenches. The assembly line doesn't care. It just builds what you design it to build, faster and cheaper than any other method in history. Henry Ford built the future. He just didn't get to choose what the future would use it for. Chapter 8, The Peace Ship and the War, November 24th, 1915. A 52-year-old man who has never held political office, never served in the military, and never traveled outside North America, announces that he's going to end the First World War. His plan is simple, or at least simple in the way only impossible plans can be. He will charter a ship, fill it with prominent Americans who share his pacifist views, sail to Europe, and talk the warring nations into stopping. No government backing, no diplomatic credentials, just force of personality, and the conviction that the war is too stupid to continue once reasonable people explain why it should end. His name is Henry Ford, and he genuinely believes this will work. The war has been raging for 16 months now. What started as a regional dispute in the Balkans has metastasized into the largest conflict in human history. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire on one side, Britain, France, Russia, and eventually dozens of other nations on the other. The fighting has settled into a stalemate. Hundreds of miles of trenches stretching across France and Belgium, men dying by the thousands to gain yards of mud, machine guns, and artillery. Making offense nearly suicidal, but defense impregnable. More than 1 million soldiers are already dead. Millions more are wounded. And the war is just getting started. America is officially neutral. President Wilson has said the country is too proud to fight, though American factories are increasingly supplying the Allies with materials and weapons. Henry Ford, who has spent his life building machines to give people freedom of movement, watches Europe destroy itself and feels something close to despair. All that speed, all that industrial capacity, all that human ingenuity, deployed to kill each other more efficiently, it's the opposite of everything he's worked for. A peace activist named Rosika Schwimmer approaches him with an idea. What if someone with money and influence, someone the newspapers pay attention to, what if that person went to Europe and tried to broker peace? Not through official channels, which are hopelessly corrupted by nationalism and pride, but through moral suasion. An appeal to common sense and shared humanity? Henry Ford, who has never been accused of excessive humility, thinks, why not me? He charters an ocean liner called the Oscar II. He sends invitations to governors, congressmen, prominent citizens, asking them to join his peace expedition. Some accept, many decline. The whole enterprise sounds quixotic at best, delusional at worst. But Ford is undeterred. He tells reporters that he'll have the boys out of the trenches by Christmas. This phrase will haunt him for the rest of his life. The Oscar II sails from Hoboken, New Jersey, on December 4th, 1915. On board are about 50 peace activists, some journalists who've come along to document what they expect to be a spectacular failure, and Henry Ford, who is already having doubts but has committed too publicly to back out now. The voyage is a disaster before the ship even reaches Europe. The peace activists fight among themselves. They can't agree on strategy or messaging or even basic logistics. Some want to meet with government officials. Some want to appeal directly to the people. Some think the entire mission should be about American neutrality. Others think it should pressure all sides to disarm. The debates are endless and circular, conducted in a fog of seasickness and second-guessing. Henry tries to mediate. He's good at organizing factories, at managing production systems where every part has a specific function. He's not good at managing idealists, each with their own vision of how peace should be achieved. The enterprise starts to resemble less a diplomatic mission and more a floating argument. The press coverage is brutal. Newspapers describe the peace ship as naive, foolish, the vanity project of a rich man who thinks money can solve problems it has no power to touch. Cartoonists draw Henry as Don Quixote tilting at windmills. Editorials question whether he's mentally stable. Theodore Roosevelt, never one for diplomatic restraint, calls the expedition silly and says Ford is being used by dangerous pacifists. The Oscar II arrives in Norway on December 18th. Henry is sick, whether from the voyage, the stress, or an actual illness. Accounts differ. He attends a few meetings with Scandinavian peace activists, where he's polite but clearly deflated. The grand reception he expected doesn't materialize. The European nations embroiled in war have no interest in a lecture about peace from an American industrialist. They're too busy killing each other. On December 23rd, Henry Ford abandons his own peace mission and sails back to America alone. He tells the remaining activists to continue the work without him. Some do for a while, achieving nothing. The war grinds on. The boys are not out of the trenches by Christmas. They won't be out for another 3 years. Henry returns to Detroit. Humiliated. The peace ship has become a punchline. Late-night comedians mock him. Business associates quietly distance themselves. Even supporters of peace think he went about it the wrong way. Too much publicity. Too little planning. Too much faith in the power of good intentions. But Henry learned something from the failure, though it's not the lesson peace activists would want him to learn. He learns that idealism without power is useless, that moral arguments don't stop wars, that nations respect strength, not reason, that if you want to change the world, you need leverage, and the only leverage that matters is economic and industrial capacity. This is a dangerous lesson for a man who controls one of the world's most efficient manufacturing systems to learn. In April 1917, Less than 18 months after the peace ship debacle, the United States enters the war. German submarines have been sinking American ships. The Zimmermann telegram has revealed German attempts to form an alliance with Mexico against the U.S. Wilson, who was too proud to fight, asks Congress for a declaration of war. It passes. America is done being neutral. Henry Ford, the pacifist who chartered a peace ship, does not protest. He does not organize another mission. He does not speak out against the war. Instead, he does what he's always done when faced with a problem. He builds things. The Ford Motor Company begins converting production. Model Ts are still being built. Civilian demand hasn't disappeared. But new assembly lines are dedicated to military vehicles. Trucks for transporting troops and supplies. Ambulances for the wounded. Staff cars for officers. Tractors for pulling artillery. The same principles that made the Model T affordable make military vehicles cheap enough to produce in the thousands. Then Henry goes further. He builds submarine chasers, small, fast boats designed to hunt German U-boats. He builds Liberty aircraft engines, 12-cylinder power plants for American warplanes. He builds steel helmets, gas mask canisters, caissons. Everything the military needs, Ford builds, using assembly line methods that make production faster and cheaper than traditional manufacturing. He tells himself he's doing this to end the war faster, that overwhelming American industrial production will force Germany to surrender, saving lives in the long run. That the peace ship failed because it lacked power. But this application of industrial might, this will actually work. Maybe he even believes it. But there's no escaping the irony. The man who wanted to get the boys out of the trenches by Christmas is now building the machines that keep them there. The factories that democratized motion are now arming a conflict that will kill 10 million people before it ends. The assembly line, designed to give workers prosperity and consumers freedom, proves just as efficient at producing weapons as it was at producing cars. Henry walks through the Highland Park plant in 1918, watching production. One assembly line builds Model Ts. Another builds Liberty engines. The workers are the same. The methods are the same. The speed is the same. Only the purpose has changed. Cars or weapons, the system doesn't care. It just builds. Somewhere in his mind, Henry must recognize the bitter paradox. He created a system so efficient, so scalable, so powerful that it can serve any purpose you feed into it. Peace or war. Freedom or death, the assembly line is neutral. It will build whatever you design it to build, faster than any other method in history, and never pause to ask whether it should. The war ends in November 1918. Germany surrenders, not because of one decisive battle, but because of exhaustion and the overwhelming industrial output of the Allied powers. America's contribution was significant, though it came late. American soldiers fought bravely. American factories supplied the material. Henry Ford's plants produced thousands of trucks, engines, and other equipment. After the armistice, Henry tells reporters that he's glad the Ford Motor Company could contribute to victory. He doesn't mention the peace ship unless asked, and when he is asked, he changes the subject. That chapter of his life is closed. Better to be remembered as someone who helped win the war than someone who failed to prevent it. But the experience changes him. Or maybe it just reveals something that was always there. Henry Ford loves efficiency. He loves production. He loves the power that comes from controlling vast industrial systems. What he's less clear about, what maybe he's never been clear about, is what those systems should be used for. Before the war, he could tell himself that the Model T was unambiguously good. It gave people freedom. After the war, that clarity is gone. He's proven that assembly lines can build weapons as easily as cars. That speed and efficiency serve whoever controls them. That the same methods that lifted workers out of poverty can equip armies for mass slaughter. This should be a moment of reflection, a time to think carefully about power and responsibility and the consequences of the systems you create. For some people, it might be. For Henry Ford, it becomes something else. It becomes a hardening, a retreat into certainty, a need to believe that his way of doing things is not just efficient, but right, moral, justified. Because if the assembly line can serve any purpose, then the only way to live with yourself is to believe that your purposes are the correct ones. And when you believe that deeply, when you're that certain of your own righteousness, you become capable of almost anything, including things that will stain your legacy forever. The peace ship taught Henry that idealism fails. The war taught him that industrial power succeeds. What he's about to do next will teach the world that a man can be brilliant, innovative, transformative, and still spread poison. The assembly line is waiting, not for cars this time, not for weapons, for ideas. And some ideas, once they're mass-produced and distributed, are harder to stop than any army. Chapter 9, The Dearborn Independent and the Darkness, May 1919. Henry Ford buys a small weekly newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. He's 55 years old, one of the richest men in America, famous around the world as an industrial genius and a symbol of American innovation. He could buy almost anything: art collections, real estate empires, entire towns. He chooses to buy a newspaper with a circulation of about 72,000, published in his hometown. When asked why, he says he wants to provide wholesome news to American families, an alternative to the sensationalism and urban cynicism of big city papers, something that reflects small-town values, honest reporting, practical advice, stories that matter to regular people. What he doesn't say, what maybe he hasn't fully articulated even to himself yet, is that he wants power over information the same way he has power over manufacturing. Control the message, shape the narrative, use distribution systems to spread ideas as efficiently as the assembly line spreads cars. For the first year or so, the Dearborn Independent is relatively harmless. Articles about farming techniques, updates on Ford Motor Company activities, general interest stories, the kind of content you'd expect from a small-town paper backed by a wealthy patron. Circulation remains modest. Most people outside Michigan don't know it exists. Then, in May 1920, everything changes. The paper publishes an article titled "The International Jew, the World's Problem." It's the first in what will become a series of 91 articles published over the next 2 years. Articles that promote the basest, most poisonous conspiracy theories about Jewish people. The Jews control international banking. The Jews manipulate governments. The Jews are responsible for everything from jazz music to Bolshevism to the decline of American morals. The Jews are engaged in a secret plot to undermine Christian civilization. It's not new material. These conspiracy theories have circulated in Europe for decades, but Henry Ford is giving them something they've never had before: American industrial distribution. The Dearborn Independent's circulation explodes, from 70,000 to 250,000 to nearly 700,000 at its peak. Ford mandates that his dealerships carry the paper, display it prominently, pressure customers to subscribe. With more than 7,000 Ford dealerships across America, The Independent becomes one of the most widely circulated publications in the country. The articles are compiled into a book called The International Jew. It's translated into 16 languages. It's distributed free at Ford dealerships. It finds its way to Germany, where a rising political figure named Adolf Hitler keeps a copy on his desk and tells reporters that Henry Ford is his inspiration. In Mein Kampf, Hitler will praise Ford as the one great American who understands the Jewish menace. This is what the assembly line looks like, applied to hate. Same principles, same efficiency, same mass distribution. Instead of Model Ts rolling off the line at Highland Park, it's conspiracy theories rolling off the presses in Dearborn. And the man who built both systems is Henry Ford. Why does he do this? That's the question historians have struggled with for a century. Some suggest he was always anti-Semitic, that his rural Protestant upbringing and limited education left him susceptible to conspiracy theories. Some point to resentment. Jewish financiers had resisted some of his business ventures, and Ford, never good at distinguishing between individuals and groups, blamed all Jews for the actions of a few. Some argue he was manipulated by his secretary, Ernest Liebold, a committed anti-Semite who had Henry's ear and used it to advance his own hatreds. Some think Henry genuinely believed the conspiracy theories, that his mind, so brilliant when applied to mechanical systems, completely failed when applied to social complexity, and some think he simply didn't care about the truth. He wanted influence, wanted to shape American thinking, and anti-Semitism was a useful tool for gaining attention and building a following. Probably all of these explanations contain some truth, but none of them excuses what happens next. Jewish leaders protest. Rabbis denounce Ford. Organizations call for boycotts of Ford products. Some Ford dealers, embarrassed by the Independent's content, quit carrying the paper, but many more embrace it. Anti-Semitism. In 1920s, America is not fringe, it's mainstream. Jews face quotas in universities, restrictions in housing, exclusion from country clubs, and professional organizations. The Independent is saying out loud what many Americans believe quietly. And Henry Ford's name legitimizes it. He's not some crackpot on a street corner. He's an industrial titan, a self-made man, a genius who revolutionized manufacturing. If Henry Ford says there's a Jewish conspiracy, millions of Americans think, maybe there's something to it. The damage spreads slowly, like poison in groundwater. Jewish families who once dreamed of buying a Model T decide they can't give their money to someone who publishes attacks on them. Jewish workers at Ford plants face increased harassment from coworkers who've been reading The Independent. Jewish businessmen find Ford dealers won't do business with them. The conspiracy theories, mass-produced and widely distributed, create real harm in thousands of small ways. Some of Ford's friends try to intervene. Thomas Edison, who's known Henry for decades, tells him the articles are beneath him, that he's damaging his reputation. Clara Ford, Henry's wife, is reportedly mortified. She's deeply religious, believes in Christian charity, and sees nothing charitable about the Independent's attacks. But Henry won't stop. He's committed now. Stopping would mean admitting he was wrong, and Henry Ford does not admit error easily. The articles continue. In 1921, in 1922, variations on the same themes. The Jewish conspiracy to control finance, the Jewish plot to corrupt American culture, the Jewish influence behind Bolshevism and socialism. The same accusations, repeated and amplified, given the weight of Ford's name and the reach of Ford's distribution system. Then, in 1924, The Independent goes after a specific target, Aaron Shapiro, a Jewish lawyer who organized agricultural cooperatives. The paper accuses him of being part of a Jewish conspiracy to control American farming. Shapiro sues for libel. The case goes to trial. And suddenly, Henry Ford faces something his money and influence can't easily fix: testimony under oath. The trial is a disaster for Ford. His lawyers try to keep him off the stand, knowing his testimony will expose how little he actually knows about the articles published under his name. It becomes clear he hasn't written them, hasn't fact-checked them, hasn't even read most of them. He simply allowed his newspaper to become a platform for hate because it aligned with some vague sense he has that unseen forces are working against American values. Before the trial concludes, Ford's lawyers negotiate a settlement. Henry issues a public apology to Shapiro and, more broadly, to the Jewish people. The apology is almost certainly written by his lawyers, not by him. The language is too careful, too legal. But it's published. It says he was wrong. It says the articles in The Independent caused unjustified harm. It says he regrets the publication. In January 1927, the Dearborn Independent stops publishing anti-Semitic articles. By the end of that year, the paper itself shuts down entirely. Henry Ford never speaks publicly about The Independent again. If asked, he changes the subject or claims he doesn't remember. The man who obsessively documented his automotive achievements treats this chapter of his life as something to be erased from the record. But you can't erase what's already been distributed. The International Jew continues to circulate in America and abroad. In Germany, the Nazi Party uses it as propaganda. Hitler's followers treat Ford as a hero. In 1938, the German government will award Henry Ford the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor Nazi Germany can bestow on a foreigner. Ford accepts it. By then, the world knows what Nazi Germany is. The Nuremberg laws have stripped Jews of citizenship rights. Kristallnacht has seen Jewish businesses destroyed and synagogues burned. The persecution is open, systematic, accelerating toward what will become the Holocaust. And Henry Ford, whose newspaper helped spread the conspiracy theories that undergird Nazi ideology, accepts their highest honor and says nothing about what's being done to Jewish people in Hitler's Germany. This is the cost of the assembly line applied to ideas. You can mass-produce cars that give millions of people freedom. You can mass-produce hate that justifies millions of deaths. The system doesn't distinguish. It just distributes efficiently and relentlessly whatever you feed into it. Henry Ford walks through his factories in the late 1920s, watching Model Ts being built with the same precision he's always demanded. He's 70 years old now, still sharp, but increasingly withdrawn. The company is struggling. Competitors have caught up. The Model T is outdated. Sales are declining. He's about to shut down the entire operation to retool for a new model. The world is changing faster than even he can keep pace with. But the damage from the Independent is done. It can't be retooled or recalled. It's out there, in the world, doing its work. The boy who took apart pocket watches to understand time has discovered something he never anticipated, that some mechanisms, once you set them in motion, you can't take apart. You can only watch them run and live with what they destroy. There's a photograph from this period. Henry standing in one of his factories, surrounded by machinery, looking not at the camera, but at something in the middle distance. His expression is hard to read. Pride, maybe, or exhaustion, or the face of a man who built systems so powerful they escaped his control, and now he doesn't know whether to marvel at their efficiency or mourn their consequences. The assembly line gave America the Model T. The assembly line gave Nazi Germany intellectual ammunition. Both are Henry Ford's legacy. Both are true. And no apology, however carefully worded by lawyers, can change what was built. But even this, even the darkness of the Independent, isn't the strangest contradiction in Henry Ford's life, because at the exact same time he's spreading conspiracy theories about Jewish plots to destroy traditional America, he's also building something else, a massive monument to the traditional American life he claims Jews are undermining, a place where the past is preserved in perfect, meticulous detail, a museum and village where every building and object tells a story about the world before the assembly line, before speed, before the very changes Henry Ford himself brought into being. He's about to spend millions of dollars recreating the world he destroyed. And if you want to understand Henry Ford, the contradictions, the genius, the blindness, you have to understand why. Chapter 10, Greenfield Village and the Museum of Lost Time. Picture Henry Ford in 1929, standing in an open field in Dearborn, watching workers reconstruct a building brick by brick. Not a new building, an old one. Specifically, the bicycle shop, where the Wright brothers built their first airplane. Henry has purchased the shop, had it disassembled in Dayton, Ohio, and shipped to Michigan. Now he's having it rebuilt exactly as it was, down to the placement of tools on the workbench and the stain patterns on the floor. He's 76 years old. He's one of the richest men in the world, and he's spending a fortune building a monument to a world that no longer exists, a world he personally did more than almost anyone to destroy. He calls it Greenfield Village, 240 acres of reconstructed buildings, relocated structures, and carefully curated historical artifacts. Not just the Wright brothers' bicycle shop, Thomas Edison's laboratory from Menlo Park, the courthouse where Abraham Lincoln practiced law, a working 1850s farm, a grist mill, a covered bridge, a general store, a one-room schoolhouse, everything arranged to create a living museum of 19th century American life. Next to the village, he builds an enormous museum, the Edison Institute, later called the Henry Ford Museum. 12 acres of exhibition space. Inside, locomotives and steam engines, furniture and dishes, tools and machines, thousands of objects documenting American innovation and daily life from the Revolutionary War through the Industrial Revolution. Together, the village and museum represent one of the most ambitious preservation projects in American history. They also represent one of the strangest acts of nostalgia ever undertaken by someone who destroyed the very thing he's nostalgic for. Because Henry Ford is the reason that 19th century America disappeared. The Model T killed the horse and buggy era. The assembly line killed craft manufacturing. The $5 day killed rural economic patterns. The man who brought speed to America is now spending millions to preserve the slow world that speed destroyed. When asked about this contradiction, Henry doesn't see it as a contradiction. He sees Greenfield Village as a classroom, a place where young people can understand where they came from, what their grandparents' lives were like, what values built America. He's particularly focused on the work ethic of that era, the self-sufficiency, the ingenuity, the make-do spirit that he believes made America great. But there's something else driving the project, something deeper and more personal. Henry is haunted by his childhood, not traumatized, haunted. The farm he hated as a boy has become, in memory, something precious. The slow pace he escaped is now the pace he mourns. The horses he despised are now symbols of a simpler time. As an old man, he's trying to reconstruct not just buildings, but a version of the past that never quite existed. One where all the virtues he values existed without any of the hardships he actually experienced. The project becomes an obsession. Henry visits the construction site daily when he's in Dearborn. He micromanages details with the same intensity he once applied to assembly line tolerances. The bricks in the Wright brothers' shop must be in the correct position. The trees in the village must be species that would have existed in the 1850s. The dirt roads must be rutted in authentic patterns. If something isn't historically accurate, it's redone. And redone again, until it matches Henry's vision of how the past should look. He's especially focused on Thomas Edison's laboratory. Edison is Henry's hero, has been since that dinner in 1896, when Edison endorsed the quadricycle. When Edison dies in 1931, Henry is devastated. He attends the funeral, then returns to Dearborn and intensifies work on the laboratory reconstruction. He wants it perfect, a shrine to the man who believed in him when others didn't. The laboratory is completed with extraordinary attention to detail. Not just the building and equipment, but the dirt floor is actual New Jersey soil, shipped from the original site. Test tubes contain residue from Edison's experiments. Notes on workbenches are positioned exactly as they were. When the laboratory opens to the public, people walk through it in hushed silence, as if entering a cathedral. which in a sense they are. Greenfield Village is Henry Ford's cathedral to innovation, to the American spirit, to the age of individual inventors and craftsmen before mass production standardized everything. It's a place where, if you squint, you can imagine that the modern world hasn't happened yet. That we're still in the era of Edison and the Wright brothers, when clever men in small workshops could change the world with their hands and minds. But step outside the village gates, and you're back in 1930s America. An America with millions of cars, paved highways, suburbs, shopping districts, traffic lights, everything moving fast, everything mass-produced, everything shaped by the assembly line. The world Henry Ford built. The irony is not subtle. Visitors tour Greenfield Village in Model A's, the car that replaced the Model T, itself mass-produced on assembly lines in the River Rouge plant just miles away. They're using the fruits of industrialization to visit a monument to pre-industrial life. They're traveling at speeds that would have terrified people in the 1850s to see buildings from the 1850s. The whole enterprise exists in a strange temporal paradox. Henry doesn't seem troubled by this. Or maybe he is troubled, and Greenfield Village is his way of processing the trouble. He's spent his life making things go faster. Now, at the end of that life, he's built a place where time stands still, where nothing changes, where the pace of life is measured in hoofbeats and seasons instead of production quotas and assembly line speed. Critics call it backward-looking. They say America should be focused on the future, not the past. That Henry Ford, of all people, should be building monuments to what's coming, not what's gone. But Henry is done building the future. He's already built it. The factories are running. The cars are everywhere. The assembly line has been copied in industries around the world. His work in that direction is complete. Greenfield Village is something else. It's Henry's attempt to recover what he himself destroyed. Not literally. You can't actually go back, but symbolically. A place where the speed stops, where craftsmanship matters more than efficiency, where individual workers build complete objects instead of installing one part 500 times a day. It's also, whether Henry admits it or not, an admission of loss. You don't build museums to things that are thriving. You build them to things that are dead. Greenfield Village is a cemetery for a way of life. A beautiful, meticulously maintained cemetery where everything is preserved exactly as it was and nothing will ever live again. The village opens to the public in 1933. It's a success. Tens of thousands of visitors in the first year, more every year after. People are hungry for this, hungry for a vision of American life before everything got complicated and fast. They walk through the buildings, watch demonstrations of blacksmithing and glass blowing and candle making, eat lunch in the reconstructed inn, and for a few hours they can pretend the modern world doesn't exist. Henry walks the village paths often. He knows every building, every artifact. He can tell you stories about each one, where it came from, why it matters, what it represents. He's built a kingdom of memory, and he rules it with the same iron will he once applied to production targets. But memory is a tricky thing. The past Henry has reconstructed is cleaner than the actual past, more orderly, more virtuous. The farms in Greenfield Village are picturesque in ways real farms never were. The workshops are organized in ways that actual workshops, cluttered with work in progress and accumulated debris, rarely achieved. The general store is stocked with goods that represent what people imagine stores used to sell, not necessarily what they actually sold. It's not history. It's mythology. The American dream in 3 dimensions. And people love it because mythology is more satisfying than history. History is messy and contradictory. Mythology is clean and meaningful. Greenfield Village tells Americans a story about themselves that they want to believe. That we came from simple, honest, hardworking people who built things with their hands and lived by clear values. That this story obscures the poverty, disease, backbreaking labor, and limited opportunities of actual 19th century life doesn't matter. The story is what matters. And Henry Ford, who spent his life obsessed with truth in mechanical systems, precision tolerances, exact specifications, measurable performance, is now dealing in something much slipperier, the truth of feeling, the accuracy of nostalgia. He's also, without quite intending to, creating a tourist industry. Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum become major attractions. Hotels open in Dearborn to accommodate visitors, restaurants, gift shops, tour buses, the whole commercial apparatus of memory. Henry has turned his nostalgia into an economic engine, which is very on brand for a man who turned everything he touched into an economic engine. But late at night, walking alone through the village after it's closed, Henry might be doing something more personal, trying to reconcile the two halves of his life, the destroyer and the preserver, the man who killed the horse and the man who rebuilt the farm, the engineer who calculated efficiency in seconds, and the curator who recreated a world where time moved in seasons. There's a small building in Greenfield Village that gets less attention than the Wright Brothers shop or Edison's laboratory. It's a simple farmhouse, not famous, not associated with any notable person or event, just a typical American farm dwelling from the 1870s. If you look closely at the layout, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the small workshop space, you might notice it resembles the farm Henry Ford grew up on. It's not an exact replica. Henry always insisted it wasn't. Just a representative example of the kind of farm that was common in Michigan in his youth. But it's close enough that you can stand in that house and imagine a boy lying in bed at night, listening to horses in the barn, dreaming of escape. That boy escaped. He built machines that let millions of others escape too. And now, 70 years later, he's rebuilt the prison, furnished it carefully, and opened it to the public. Come see where we came from. Come remember what we left behind. Come understand that something was lost when we gained so much. The assembly line runs at River Rouge. Greenfield Village stands in Dearborn. Both are Henry Ford's creation. Both represent his vision of America. And both are true, even though they contradict each other in almost every possible way. Speed and stillness, progress and nostalgia, the future and the past. Henry Ford built both, and he never saw the contradiction. Or maybe he saw it perfectly and understood that Americans would always want both. The freedom to move fast and the comfort of remembering when things moved slow. The efficiency of mass production and the romance of craftsmanship. The Model T and the covered bridge. You can have both, Henry's creation suggests, as long as you keep them in separate places. Let the factory run at full speed. Let the village preserve the past. Never let them touch. Never acknowledge that one killed the other. Just build them both, perfectly, and let people choose which one they want to visit on any given day. It's a very American solution, and Henry Ford, for all his contradictions and failures, for all the darkness of the Dearborn Independent and the monotony of the assembly line, understood Americans better than almost anyone. We want to go fast and slow down at the same time. We want innovation and tradition. We want to destroy the past and preserve it. We want the world to change and stay the same. Henry gave us all of that. The question is whether we're grateful or just confused. The village still exists. The museum still exists. Millions of people have walked through them, including school children brought in buses to learn about American history. What they learn is complicated. That progress requires destruction. That nostalgia is a form of mourning. That the same man who gave us speed also gave us a place to remember slowness. And that the past, once it's gone, can be rebuilt, but never recovered. You can recreate every brick, every board, every tool, but you can't recreate the world that made them necessary. That world is gone. The assembly line saw to that. Henry Ford built the machine that killed the past. Then he built a museum to preserve the corpse. Both acts required genius. Both acts required ruthlessness. Both acts required a man willing to reshape the world according to his vision, regardless of what the world wanted or needed. The factories are still running. The village is still standing. And somewhere between them is the truth about what progress costs and whether we can ever really go home again. Chapter 11, The River Rouge and the Empire of Vertical Integration, 1927. The Ford Motor Company shuts down every factory. Complete cessation. No cars, no production, no assembly lines running. For 6 months, the entire operation goes dark, while Henry Ford retool everything for a new model. The Model T, after 19 years and 15 million units, is finally obsolete. The world has moved on. Competitors build cars with better styling, more power, actual features. The Model T is sturdy and cheap and hopelessly outdated. Henry is 64 years old. He's being forced to admit that his greatest creation has reached the end of its life. The admission doesn't come easily, but when it comes absolutely. Shut it all down. Start over. Build something new. The new car will be called the Model A, recycling the name from Ford's first success, as if he's trying to reset time itself. But more important than the new car is where it will be built. Not at Highland Park, the factory that revolutionized manufacturing in 1913. That plant is already too small, too limited, too dependent on outside suppliers. Henry has a bigger vision now. A complete vision. He's going to build a factory that makes everything. The River Rouge plant in Dearborn is already partially operational. Henry started building it during World War I to manufacture Eagle boats for submarine patrol. But now he's expanding it into something unprecedented in industrial history. Not just a factory, an empire. 2,000 acres of buildings, docks, furnaces, power plants, and assembly lines connected by 100 miles of railroad track and internal roads. At River Rouge, raw materials arrive at one end and finished cars emerge at the other. Iron ore from Ford-owned mines in Michigan and Minnesota arrives by ship at Ford-owned docks. It's processed in Ford-owned blast furnaces into steel. The steel is shaped in Ford-owned stamping plants into body panels and frames. Ford-owned glass plants make the windows. Ford-owned rubber plants make the tires. Ford-owned power plants generate the electricity. Ford-owned railways move everything between buildings. And at the end of this elaborate industrial choreography, Model A's roll off the assembly line, built entirely from Ford-controlled materials in Ford-controlled facilities. It's called vertical integration, and Ford takes it further than anyone before or since. Other manufacturers buy parts from suppliers. Ford makes the suppliers obsolete. Other manufacturers worry about supply chain disruptions. Ford owns the supply chain from mine to showroom. It's the ultimate expression of Henry's lifelong obsession with control. If you want something done right, do it yourself. If you want it done very right, do everything yourself. The scale is staggering. At full operation, River Rouge employs more than 100,000 workers. It has its own police force, fire department, hospital, and power plant. It consumes more electricity than many American cities. The blast furnaces run continuously, 24 hours a day, fed by mountains of iron ore and coal. The foundry pours molten metal into molds at temperatures that turn the building into a vision of industrial hell. Heat and noise and sparks and danger. But it's also beautiful in its way. The precision of it. The integration. The way materials flow through the complex in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Each step timed to feed the next. Nothing wasted. Everything purposeful. If Highland Park was a pocket watch, River Rouge is a mechanical cosmos. Vast and intricate and running with inhuman precision. Henry walks through the complex frequently in the early years. He's older now. But his obsession with detail hasn't diminished. He stops at the blast furnaces to check iron quality. He visits the stamping plants to observe die changes. He times operations with his stopwatch, looking for inefficiencies. River Rouge is his masterwork, the culmination of everything he's learned about manufacturing. And he won't let it be anything less than perfect. But perfection at this scale requires sacrifices. The working conditions at River Rouge are brutal. The heat in the foundry reaches over 120 degrees. The noise in the stamping plants is deafening. Workers go home with ears ringing, many of them developing permanent hearing loss. The pace is relentless. The work is dangerous. Men are crushed by machinery, burned by molten metal, poisoned by industrial chemicals. Safety regulations are minimal. Production targets are everything. And now there's no $5 day to compensate for the hardship. The Model A era doesn't feature the same progressive wage policies that made Highland Park famous. Competition is fiercer. The economy is shakier. Henry is older, more conservative, less interested in social experiments. Workers make decent money, better than many factory jobs. But the relationship between Ford and his employees has calcified. It's no longer the paternalistic experiment of 1914. It's just industrial labor, carried out at massive scale with maximum efficiency. The workers understand this. They understand they're components in a vast machine, replaceable, fungible. The sociological department is gone. There are no home visits anymore. No investigators checking whether you live a moral life. That experiment ended years ago, quietly discontinued when it became too expensive to maintain. Now you show up, you do your job, you go home. If you complain, there are 10 men waiting to take your place. River Rouge reaches peak efficiency in the early 1930s. A new Model A rolls off the line every 49 seconds. Parts arrive from across the complex in precisely timed deliveries. The whole system operates like clockwork. Henry's old obsession with watch mechanisms scaled up to industrial proportions. It works. It produces cars cheaply and quickly. It makes Ford Motor Company immensely profitable, even during the Depression. But it also makes enemies. Workers at River Rouge begin organizing. They talk to union representatives. They pass around literature about collective bargaining and worker rights. Henry Ford, who once positioned himself as a friend to the working man, now sees unions as the enemy. Interference in his system, obstacles to efficiency. He hires security forces to root out union sympathizers. He fires workers suspected of organizing. He tells reporters that his workers don't need unions because he already pays them fairly. The workers disagree. They see the massive profits River Rouge generates. They see Henry living in a mansion while they rent rooms in boarding houses. They see the danger and the pace and the constant pressure, and they think, we built this empire. We deserve a voice in how it's run. The conflict builds slowly through the early 1930s. A few strikes, some protests. Nothing major. Henry's security forces, led by a man named Harry Bennett, a former boxer and Navy sailor who runs Ford's internal police like a private army, keep things under control. Bennett's methods are not gentle. Suspected union organizers are beaten. Protesters are arrested or simply disappear. River Rouge operates smoothly because dissent is crushed efficiently. But outside the gates, the United Automobile Workers Union is growing. They've successfully organized General Motors and Chrysler. Ford is the last major holdout, and the UAW is determined to bring River Rouge into the fold. Henry refuses. Absolutely. He spent his life building this system. He's not going to hand control to a union. He's not going to negotiate with outsiders about how his company should run. River Rouge is his creation, and he'll decide how it operates. This is the same stubbornness that let him succeed where others failed. The same refusal to compromise that kept him focused on the Model T when investors wanted him to diversify. The same iron will that built an assembly line when everyone said it couldn't work. But stubbornness has a dark side. It becomes rigidity, inflexibility, the inability to see when the world has changed, and your methods need to change with it. Henry Ford, in 1937, is 74 years old. He's still brilliant in some ways, still capable of intuitive leaps about manufacturing and design. But he's also increasingly isolated, surrounded by yes-men, convinced of his own righteousness, unable to imagine that workers might have legitimate grievances. He's built an empire of metal and machines, and he thinks he can run it forever by the same rules he established when he was younger. But River Rouge is not Highland Park in 1914. The workers are not grateful immigrants thrilled with $5 a day. The world is not the world of Model Ts and peace ships and industrial experiments. It's the world of the Great Depression, of rising labor movements, of workers who've learned that organization gives them power. And that world is about to collide with Henry Ford's refusal to acknowledge it. The collision will happen on an overpass, an ordinary bridge spanning Miller Road near the River Rouge plant gates, May 26, 1937. It's called the Battle of the Overpass, and it will mark the moment when Henry Ford's absolute control over his empire begins to crumble. But before that happens, walk through River Rouge one more time, not as a worker or a manager or an engineer, but as an observer. Stand in the middle of the complex and look around. Blast furnaces glowing orange against the sky. Stamping plants hammering away at 800 tons of pressure. Assembly lines moving at their relentless pace. Railcars delivering coal and ore. Ships at the docks unloading raw materials from mines 1,000 miles away. Power plants generating electricity. Tens of thousands of workers moving through the complex, each one performing their assigned task, all of them synchronized into one vast industrial ballet. This is what Henry Ford built, an empire of vertical integration, a self-contained industrial ecosystem that transforms Earth into automobiles. It's the logical conclusion of everything he's believed about manufacturing. Control everything, own everything, let nothing depend on forces outside your command. It's magnificent, it's terrifying, and it's about to learn that there's one thing you can't vertically integrate, one resource you can't fully control, no matter how much power you accumulate. Human beings, human will, human dignity, the workers who make the system run. River Rouge can make steel from ore and cars from steel, but it can't make workers forget they're human. Can't make them stop wanting respect and safety and a voice in their own fate. Can't make them accept being treated as components in a machine, no matter how efficiently the machine runs. Henry Ford built the most advanced factory in the world. He's about to discover that building things is easier than managing the people who make them. That efficiency is not the same as justice. That power, no matter how total it seems, is always contingent on the consent of those it controls. The overpass is waiting. The union organizers are coming. And the empire of vertical integration is about to face a problem that can't be solved with better manufacturing techniques or tighter control. It's going to face workers who are tired of being parts in someone else's machine. Chapter 12, The Battle of the Overpass, May 26, 1937. A Wednesday afternoon, shift change at the River Rouge plant. Thousands of workers streaming out the gates, heading home after 8 hours of heat and noise and repetitive labor. The sky is overcast. There's a pedestrian overpass spanning Miller Road at Gate 4. Just a simple bridge for workers to cross the street safely. About 50 feet long, metal railings on both sides. Completely ordinary. 4 men are walking onto that overpass. Union organizers. They're with the United Automobile Workers, and they're here to distribute the leaflets to Ford workers. Information about collective bargaining, about worker rights, about how unionization has improved conditions at General Motors and Chrysler. The men are not armed. They're not threatening anyone. They're exercising what they believe is their First Amendment right to distribute literature in a public space. The men have names: Walter Reuther, Richard Frankenstein, Robert Cantor, and J.J. Kennedy. Reuther and Frankenstein are the most prominent. Reuther especially will become one of the most important labor leaders of the 20th century. But right now, on this overpass, they're just four men with leaflets, walking into a trap. Waiting for them are about 40 members of Ford's service department. That's the official name for Harry Bennett's security force, the private army that keeps order at River Rouge. They're big men, strong men. Many of them have backgrounds in boxing or law enforcement or street violence. They're not uniformed police. They're not accountable to any public authority. They work for Henry Ford, and their job is to protect his factory from anyone he defines as a threat. Today, the threat is four men with paper. What happens next takes less than 5 minutes, but it's been building for years. The service department men surround the organizers. No warning, no request to leave, just sudden violence, fists and boots. The organizers try to defend themselves, but they're outnumbered 10-1. They're beaten to the ground, kicked. One man's back is broken. He'll carry the injury for the rest of his life. Another has his skull fractured. The attack is methodical, professional, designed to inflict maximum pain and send a clear message. Photographers from Detroit newspapers are there. They've been tipped off that something might happen. They're positioned at a distance, shooting with telephoto lenses. The service department men see them, but don't stop the beating. Either they don't care, or they don't understand that this moment is being documented. That the violence they're committing on Henry Ford's behalf is about to become national news. The photographs appear in newspapers the next day. They're shocking. Men being kicked while they're down. Blood on the concrete. Faces twisted in pain. One image in particular captures everything. Richard Frankenstein held by service department men, while another man punches him in the face. His coat is torn. His expression is one of helpless fury. The photo is titled Battle of the Overpass. Though the battle suggests two sides fighting, this is just an assault. The public reaction is immediate and overwhelmingly negative. Even people who don't support unions, even people who think Henry Ford is a genius and unions are troublemakers, even they look at these photographs and think, this is too much. You don't beat unarmed men for handing out leaflets. That's not labor relations. That's thuggery. The National Labor Relations Board launches an investigation. Testimony reveals the extent of Ford's anti-union activities. The service department has been infiltrating union meetings, compiling lists of sympathizers, creating an atmosphere of fear and surveillance at River Rouge. Workers testify about being fired for union activity, about being beaten for attending meetings, about working in an environment where expressing discontent means risking your livelihood and your physical safety. Ford's lawyers deny everything. They claim the organizers provoked the violence, that they were trespassing, that the service department men were defending Ford property. But the photographs make these claims impossible to sustain. You can't look at those images and conclude that the men being beaten posed any threat. Henry Ford, when asked about the incident, expresses no regret. He says his workers don't want unions, that outside agitators are trying to disrupt a happy workplace, that he's treated his workers fairly for decades, and they're grateful for it. He seems genuinely unable to comprehend that workers might have legitimate grievances, that the system he built, for all its efficiency, might be grinding people down in ways that can't be fixed with better wages alone. This is the blindness that comes from absolute control. When you've built everything yourself, when every system operates according to your design, it's nearly impossible to see the flaws. To Henry, River Rouge is a masterpiece of industrial integration. The workers should be grateful to be part of it. That they're organizing against him feels like betrayal, like ingratitude, like proof that they don't understand what he's built for them. But the workers understand perfectly. They understand that vertical integration means Ford controls everything about their working lives. That efficiency means every second is measured and optimized. That profitability means production targets that push human bodies past their limits. They're grateful for the wages. They're not grateful for the conditions. And they want a voice in changing those conditions. The Battle of the Overpass becomes a turning point. Not immediately. Ford will resist unionization for another 4 years, but the photographs have changed public opinion. Ford is no longer the progressive industrialist who paid $5 a day. He's the old man who sends thugs to beat workers. The narrative has shifted. The UAW intensifies its organizing efforts. More workers join. More protests happen. The National Labor Relations Board rules that Ford violated federal labor law and must cease anti-union activities. Ford ignores the ruling. Bennett's service department continues its intimidation tactics, but the momentum has shifted. The workers aren't backing down. In 1941, River Rouge goes on strike. Not a small protest, a full work stoppage. 50,000 workers walk out. The massive complex that produces a car every 49 seconds goes silent. The blast furnaces cool. The assembly lines stop. The empire of vertical integration proves suddenly, dramatically vulnerable. Because no matter how much you control, the ore mines, the steel mills, the power plants, the railroads, you can't control human will. And when 50,000 people decide simultaneously that they won't work, your empire stops. The strike lasts 10 days. Henry wants to hold out forever. He's convinced he can break the union if he just refuses to negotiate. But his business partners, his son Etzel, even his wife Clara, they all tell him the same thing. It's over. The old way is finished. The workers have won. You have to negotiate. On June 20th, 1941, Henry Ford signs an agreement with the UAW. It's one of the most comprehensive union contracts in American industry. Better wages, improved safety conditions, grievance procedures, protection against arbitrary firing. Everything the workers have been demanding. Everything Henry has been refusing for years. He signs the agreement in his office at River Rouge, surrounded by lawyers and union representatives and company executives. His hand shakes slightly as he writes his name. He's 77 years old. He's just surrendered control over a significant portion of his empire. The man who built a factory that makes everything now has to share power with people who make the factory run. Later, Henry will tell people that Clara convinced him to sign, that she threatened to leave him if he didn't end the violence and negotiate with the union. This might be true. It's also a convenient way to avoid admitting that he lost, that the system he built couldn't sustain itself against organized worker resistance, that efficiency and control were not enough. River Rouge continues operating under the new agreement. The factory is still impressive, still vast, still capable of transforming raw materials into automobiles with remarkable efficiency. But the relationship between management and workers has fundamentally changed. Workers have representation now, a voice, due process. The paternalistic dictatorship that Henry established has become something more complicated, more democratic, less efficient in some ways perhaps, but more humane. Henry walks through River Rouge less frequently after the agreement. It's not fully his anymore. Oh, he still owns it, but he doesn't control it the way he once did. The workers have power now. The union can negotiate, can demand changes, can resist. And for a man who spent his life obsessed with control, this loss is almost unbearable. The Battle of the Overpass photographs hang in labor union offices across America. They're used in organizing campaigns as evidence of what workers face without representation. The images have become iconic, symbols of corporate brutality and worker resistance. Henry Ford, who carefully controlled his public image for decades, is now immortalized in photographs that show his employees beating unarmed men. This is not how he wanted to be remembered, not the legacy he spent 70 years building. He revolutionized manufacturing. He made cars affordable. He paid high wages when others didn't. And now, at the end of his career, he's the villain in labor history, the man who had to be forced to treat his workers with dignity. Both narratives are true. He did revolutionize manufacturing. He did pay high wages. He also created working conditions that were dehumanizing and dangerous. He also deployed violence against people exercising their rights. The contradictions don't cancel out, they coexist. And the Battle of the Overpass is the moment when those contradictions became impossible to ignore. Henry Ford built an empire of vertical integration where he controlled everything from iron ore to finished automobiles, but he couldn't integrate the human element, couldn't turn workers into components that would operate without complaint according to his specifications, couldn't engineer away the desire for dignity and respect and a voice in one's own fate. The overpass still exists. It's part of the River Rouge complex, which still produces vehicles, not for Ford anymore, but for various manufacturers who have leased the facilities. You can stand on that overpass today and look at the factory spreading across 2,000 acres and think about what happened there in 1937. 4 men with leaflets, 40 men with orders to stop them, photographers capturing violence that would change labor history. The boy who hated the sound of horses built a factory that ran like a machine. But machines are easy to control. People are not. And when Henry Ford finally learned that lesson, it was on an overpass, in photographs that made his private security force look like a gang of thugs, in a moment that marked the beginning of the end of his absolute power. The empire of vertical integration still stood, but it no longer belonged entirely to the man who built it. It belonged, at least partially, to the workers who made it run. And Henry Ford, who never liked sharing control with anyone, had to live with that reality for the last 6 years of his life. The assembly line kept running, but it ran under different rules now. Rules Henry didn't write, rules he was forced to accept. And for a man who spent his life remaking the world according to his vision, that acceptance might have been the hardest thing he ever built. Chapter 13, The War. He finally joined, December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. America is at war again, and this time there's no peace ship, no speeches about getting the boys home by Christmas, no illusions that industrial might should be used only for peaceful purposes. Henry Ford is 78 years old, and the government is asking, politely at first, then more insistently, for his factories to build weapons. He says yes. Of course he says yes. What else can he say? The country is under attack. Young men are volunteering by the thousands. Every factory in America is being mobilized for war production. And the Ford Motor Company, with its unmatched manufacturing capacity, with River Rouge capable of producing anything at massive scale, is needed desperately. But there's a bitter irony here that Henry can't quite escape. 25 years ago, he tried to stop a war and failed spectacularly. Now he's being asked to help fight one. The peace ship sailed in idealistic futility. The war production will be devastatingly effective. History is making a point about power and intention, though whether Henry understands the lesson is unclear. The government wants bombers, specifically B-24 Liberators, 4-engine heavy bombers capable of flying deep into enemy territory, dropping thousands of pounds of explosives, and making it back. They're complex machines, more than 100,000 parts, thousands of rivets, hydraulic systems, electrical systems, weapons systems. Each bomber takes hundreds of workers thousands of hours to build, using traditional aircraft manufacturing methods. The military is desperate for them. needs them in quantities that seem impossible. Consolidated Aircraft, the company that designed the B-24, is building maybe one per day at its San Diego plant. The government wants dozens per day, hundreds per day, thousands total. Enough to darken the skies over Germany and Japan, enough to win the war through aerial bombardment. Notice they ask Henry Ford, "Can you do this? Can you apply assembly line methods to aircraft production? Can you build bombers the way you built Model Ts?" Henry studies the problem. He sends engineers to San Diego to examine the B-24. They take measurements, draw diagrams, break down every component. And Henry starts to see it, not as an airplane, as a manufacturing challenge, just another collection of parts that need to be organized into efficient sequence. The principles are the same, whether you're building cars or bombers: standardization, division of labor, continuous flow, speed. He decides to build a new plant, not at River Rouge. That complex is already running at capacity, producing trucks and jeeps and tank engines. He needs something purpose-built, something designed specifically for aircraft. He chooses a site near Ypsilanti, Michigan. Farmland. Flat and empty. 3 square miles of nothing that will become something unprecedented. They call it Willow Run. Construction begins in April 1941, before Pearl Harbor, when the war was still Europe's problem. By March 1942, the building is complete. It's the largest room under one roof anywhere in the world. 3,300 feet long, more than half a mile. 300 feet wide. 45 acres of uninterrupted floor space. The assembly line runs the entire length of the building. At one end, raw aluminum arrives. At the other end, completed B-24s roll out the door. It's the assembly line taken to its ultimate expression. Not cars this time. Weapons. Flying fortresses of aluminum and steel, built to carry men into combat and bombs onto cities. Built using the same principles Henry developed at Highland Park 30 years ago. Speed, efficiency, repetition. The only difference is the product and the stakes. The stakes are everything. Willow Run struggles initially. Aircraft manufacturing is more complex than cars. The tolerances are tighter. The materials are more difficult to work with. Aluminum is lighter than steel, but harder to form. Riveting has to be precise. Lives depend on these connections, holding at 25,000 feet. Early production is slow. Quality problems plague the first bombers. The military is impatient. Critics say Ford bit off more than he can chew, that cars and bombers are too different, that the assembly line won't work for aircraft. Henry Ford has heard this before. People said the assembly line wouldn't work for cars. They were wrong. He'll prove them wrong again. He brings in more engineers, redesigns workflows, breaks the bomber construction into smaller subassemblies, trains workers with extraordinary specificity. You don't learn to build a bomber. You learn to install one type of rivet in one specific section. The same principles that made Model T production efficient. The same dehumanizing division of labor. But it works. By 1943, Willow Run is producing one B-24 per hour. 42,000 workers on multiple shifts, 24 hours a day, building bombers with the same relentless efficiency that once built cars. Each bomber contains 160,000 rivets, installed by workers who perform the same motion thousands of times per shift. The work is just as monotonous as it ever was at Highland Park or River Rouge. But now it's for the war effort, and the monotony feels patriotic. Henry walks through Willow Run occasionally, but his involvement is less direct than in earlier projects. He's old now, frail. His memory is starting to fail. His son Edsel is running much of the day-to-day operation, though Henry still technically holds power. And there's tension between them. There's always been tension. Henry is stubborn, resistant to change, unwilling to acknowledge that its methods need updating. Edsel is more diplomatic, more modern in his thinking, more willing to listen to engineers and managers who understand that the world has changed since 1914. In May 1943, Edsel dies. Cancer. He's only 49 years old. Henry is devastated. Whatever their conflicts, Edsel was his son, his heir, the person who was supposed to carry the company forward. Now he's gone, and Henry is left trying to run a massive wartime production operation while grieving and while his own health deteriorates. But Willow Run keeps running because the war doesn't pause for grief. Young men are dying in Europe and the Pacific, and they need bombers. They need them faster than anyone thought possible, and the assembly line delivers. By the time production ends in 1945, Willow Run has built over 8,000 B-24As, half of all Liberators produced during the war. Each one carries a crew of 10 men into combat. Each one drops thousands of pounds of bombs on enemy targets. Each one is built using methods Henry Ford developed to make transportation affordable. The irony is almost too heavy to bear. The boy who hated waiting for horses built a system to make cars cheap. That system gets adapted to build bombers cheap. Those bombers kill hundreds of thousands of people. Cities are reduced to rubble. Dresden, Hamburg, Tokyo. The firebombing campaigns that turn urban areas into infernos. American bombers, many of them built at Willow Run, participate in all of it. Henry Ford doesn't think about the people on the receiving end, or if he does, he doesn't speak about it. He thinks about production numbers, efficiency metrics, how many bombers per day, how quickly problems are solved, whether the assembly line is running at optimal speed. It's easier to think about the system than the consequences. Easier to focus on manufacturing excellence than on what that excellence enables. And the excellence is real. Willow Run is an engineering triumph. It proves that assembly line methods can be applied to complex products beyond automobiles. That vertical integration and standardization and continuous flow can revolutionize any industry. After the war, these lessons will reshape aerospace manufacturing, commercial aviation, even spacecraft production. The methods Ford perfected building bombers will help build the planes that carry millions of passengers annually. Will help build the rockets that reach the moon. But first, they build weapons, tools for killing, and Henry Ford, the pacifist who sailed on a peace ship, the man who once believed machines should liberate a people rather than destroy them, presides over their production. He's not happy about it. He's not proud, but he does it. Because the war demands it, because his country needs it, because sometimes the systems you build serve purposes you never intended. Is he haunted by this? Does he lie awake at night thinking about the peace ship and Willow Run? About the idealistic journey to Europe and the bombers flying missions over Germany? About the farm boy who wanted to make life easier and the old man whose factories make death more efficient? We don't know. Henry Ford doesn't talk about such things. He's never been introspective in that way. He builds. He produces. He solves problems. The moral weight of those solutions is something he leaves to others. But Clara knows. His wife watches him age through the war years, watches the grief over Edsel compound with the strain of wartime production. She sees him walking through the house at night, confused sometimes, forgetting where he is or what year it is. She sees the man who remade the world lose his grip on the world he made. The war ends in 1945. VE Day in May. VJ Day in August. The bombers stop flying. Willow Run stops producing. The massive assembly line that churned out B-24S goes silent. 42,000 workers lose their jobs. Almost overnight, the building sits empty, too large and specialized for any peacetime purpose. Ford Motor Company returns to making cars, new models, new designs. The post-war boom is beginning. Americans want to buy everything, including automobiles. The company is positioned to capitalize on this, but Henry is barely involved anymore. He's 82 years old. His health is failing rapidly. The company is being run by his grandson, Henry Ford II, young and capable, but inheriting a mess of outdated practices and poor management. Henry spends his final years at Fair Lane, his estate in Dearborn. He walks the grounds. He visits Greenfield Village sometimes. He doesn't go to the factories much. The world he built continues without him, which might be the hardest thing for any builder to accept. That the systems you create outlive you. That they operate according to their own logic once you're gone. That you don't control the future any more than you controlled the past. The peace ship failed. The war production succeeded. Both are his legacy. The man who wanted to end war helped win one. The man who believed in the power of moral suasion discovered the power of industrial might. The man who built freedom built weapons. All of it is true. None of it cancels out. And as Henry Ford enters the final year of his life, he carries all these contradictions with him: the genius and the hate, the innovation and the stubborn blindness, the democracy of motion and the dehumanization of labor, the $5 day and the battle of the overpass, the Model T and the B-24. He built the 20th century, or a significant piece of it. And now, in 1946, he's losing his ability to remember what he built. The mind that could hold thousands of specifications and tolerances and production sequences is starting to fail. He forgets names, forgets dates, sometimes forgets where he is. But muscle memory remains. If you put a broken watch in his hands, he can still take it apart. Still see how the pieces fit together. Still understand the logic of gears and springs and precise mechanical motion. The first obsession persists when everything else fades. The boy who took apart time itself is running out of time. And when it ends, when the mechanism finally stops, the question remains: what did he build? What did all that speed and efficiency and relentless forward motion actually create? The world will spend decades trying to answer that question. But first, there's one last drive, one final moment when Henry Ford and the machine that defined him come together one more time. April 1947. A cold spring morning. An old man and an automobile, and a sense that something is ending. Not just a life, an era. Chapter 14. The Last Drive. April 7th, 1947. Fair Lane Estate in Dearborn. Morning. Henry Ford wakes in the bedroom he's shared with Clara for decades, in the house he built when he was rich enough to build anything, overlooking the Rouge River that gave its name to his greatest factory. He's 83 years old. His body is failing in the slow, incremental way that bodies do at the end of long lives. His heart is weak. His breathing is labored. He's been sick for days, though he refuses to admit how sick. He tells Clara he wants to go for a drive. This is not unusual. Henry has always found comfort in motion. Even now, even diminished, he likes to be in cars, likes to feel the engine vibrate through the frame, likes to watch the world pass by at speeds his father could never have imagined. The farm boy who hated the slow rhythm of horses has spent 8 decades making sure he never has to move slowly again. Clara worries. He's too weak. He should rest. But arguing with Henry Ford has never been productive, and she's learned over 58 years of marriage to pick her battles. If he wants to drive, they'll drive. She'll go with him. Make sure he's safe. Make sure he comes back. They get into one of the cars. Not a new model. Henry prefers older Fords, cars from the era when he still controlled every detail of their design. A worker drives. Henry sits in the back with Clara. They pull out of the estate and onto the roads of Dearborn, roads that were dirt paths when Henry was young and are paved highways now, built to accommodate the millions of cars his factories produced. They drive past Greenfield Village. Henry can see some of the buildings from the road. The replica farms and workshops and historical structures he spent millions preserving. A museum to a world he destroyed. He built that too. Can't escape that irony even now. They drive past River Rouge. 2,000 acres of factories still running, still producing, though not at the pace they once did. The war production has ended. The post-war boom hasn't fully started. The plant is in a transitional moment, just like Henry, waiting to see what comes next. Henry doesn't ask to stop, doesn't want to tour the facilities, just wants to see them from the road, verify they're still there, still operating, still standing as evidence that he existed, that he built something that mattered. They drive through Detroit. The city is so much larger than when Henry was young. Paved streets where there used to be mud. Tall buildings where there used to be empty lots. Traffic lights controlling intersections where horses and buggies once navigated by informal courtesy. And everywhere cars. Fords and Chevrolets and Chryslers and dozens of other brands. The democratization of motion accomplished. The thing Henry set out to do when he was a chief engineer in a brick shed on Bagley Avenue, building a quadricycle by lamplight. They're all his children in a sense, not just the Fords. All of them. Because even the competitors used methods Ford pioneered. The assembly line, standardized parts, mass production. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he invented the world where automobiles are everywhere, where they're not toys for the rich, but tools for everyone, where speed is not a luxury, but an expectation. He did that. The man in the back seat of this car, struggling to breathe, memory failing, body shutting down. He did that. Changed how people move, changed how people live, changed the physical layout of cities and the economic patterns of nations. All because he hated waiting for horses. The drive lasts maybe an hour. They return to Fair Lane as the morning shifts toward noon. Henry is exhausted. The effort of sitting upright, of staying conscious, of witnessing the world he made, it's drained him. Clara helps him back to bed. He lies down without protest, which tells her how sick he really is. Henry Ford does not lie down willingly. He spends the rest of the day in bed. That evening, there's a storm. Heavy rain. Thunder. The Rouge River rises, flooding the estate's powerhouse and cutting electricity to the main house. Candles are lit. The house that electricity built. Henry was obsessed with electrification, invested heavily in electrical systems, built a power empire before he built a car empire. That house now lit by fire, by the oldest, slowest form of light. Another irony, in a life full of them. Clara sits with him, holds his hand. They don't talk much. There's not much to say. 58 years of marriage? Everything important has been said already, or doesn't need saying. They just sit together in the candlelight, listening to the rain, listening to his labored breathing, waiting. Somewhere around 11 o'clock, his breathing changes, becomes shallower, more irregular. Clara knows. She's been waiting for this. She calls for help, but she knows. At 11:40 p.m. on April 7th, 1947, Henry Ford dies. In his bed, in his house, with his wife beside him. The power is out. The candles are burning. The rain is falling. And the man who spent his life obsessed with mechanical motion finally stops moving. The news spreads quickly. By morning, newspapers around the world carry the story. Henry Ford, dead at 83. Automobile pioneer dies. Industrial giant passes. The obituaries are long and complicated, trying to capture a life that doesn't fit neat summary. They talk about the Model T, the $5 day, the assembly line. Some mention Greenfield Village. Some mention Willow Run and war production. A few, more honestly, mention the Dearborn Independent and the anti-Semitism. Most struggle to reconcile the contradictions, the genius and the hate, the innovation and the stubbornness, the man who liberated millions and dehumanized thousands. The funeral is held at Greenfield Village. This is fitting. Henry surrounded one last time by the world he tried to preserve, the world before speed, before his own inventions changed everything. He's buried in the Ford family cemetery in Detroit. The grave is simple. Surprisingly simple for a man who was among the richest in the world. Just a stone with his name and dates. No grand monument, no towering memorial. Just Henry Ford, 1863 to 1947. The company continues. Under his grandson, Ford Motor Company will modernize, adapt, compete successfully in the post-war economy. River Rouge continues to operate. Willow Run is eventually sold, converted to other uses. Greenfield Village becomes a major tourist attraction. The Model T becomes a symbol of American innovation. The assembly line becomes standard practice in industries around the world. Henry Ford's influence doesn't end with his death. Can't end. Because he didn't just build products. He built systems, ways of thinking about manufacturing and labor and efficiency. Those systems continue to shape the world, for better and worse. Mostly, both simultaneously. Think about what he started. A boy on a Michigan farm, listening to horses, dreaming of escape. That boy became a man who gave millions of people the means to escape, who made motion affordable, who proved that carefully designed systems could produce abundance, who believed genuinely that making things faster and cheaper would make people's lives better. And he was right. Partly. The Model T did make lives better. People could visit family in distant towns. Doctors could reach patients faster. Commerce expanded. Opportunities multiplied. The freedom to go anywhere, anytime. That's not a small thing. That changed America in fundamental ways. But he was also wrong. The same systems that produced abundance produced monotony. The same assembly lines that made cars affordable made work dehumanizing. The same efficiency that created prosperity created precarity. Workers became replaceable parts, valued only for the speed and precision of their repeated motions. The democracy of motion came with a cost in human dignity. And beyond that, beyond the complicated legacy of the assembly line, there's the darkness, the Dearborn Independent, the anti-Semitism, the distribution of hate. With the same efficiency he once distributed cars. That's part of the legacy too. Can't be separated out, can't be excused because the Model T was revolutionary or the $5 day was progressive. The poison he spread did real harm, influenced real violence, gave intellectual cover to real atrocities. Henry Ford. On his deathbed is all of these things at once, the liberator and the oppressor, the genius and the bigot, the man who saw further than almost anyone, and the man who was blind to his own moral failures, the builder of the future and the curator of the past, the boy who escaped the farm and the old man who reconstructed it brick by brick. The rain continues to fall on Fair Lane. The candles burn lower. Clara sits in the darkness, holding the hand of a man who is no longer there. The body remains, but Henry, the consciousness that contained all those contradictions, all that brilliance and blindness, is gone. Outside in the darkness and rain, America continues. Cities full of cars, factories full of assembly lines, suburbs that wouldn't exist without affordable transportation, a whole geography of American life shaped by the man who just died. He built so much of what we take for granted. The speed, the convenience, the expectation that things should be fast and cheap and constantly improving. But he also built the problems we're still trying to solve. The monotony of assembly line work, the dehumanization of efficiency-obsessed systems, the way productivity metrics can blind us to human cost. The ease with which industrial distribution systems can spread poison as effectively as they spread products. When Henry Ford took apart that pocket watch in 1876, he learned that complex systems are just simple parts arranged correctly. He spent the next 70 years applying that lesson to manufacturing. He proved that cars could be built like watches. Standardized components, precise assembly, mass production. It worked. It revolutionized the world. But people are not watches. Society is not a pocket watch. You can't take them apart, rearrange the components, and expect everything to work better. Or maybe you can, but the human cost is higher than any efficiency gain. Henry Ford learned this lesson slowly, reluctantly, incompletely, maybe never fully learned it at all. The last drive ended at Fair Lane. The last breath ended at 11:40 p.m. But the motion continues. Can't stop it now. The systems are built. The factories are running. The assembly lines that Henry Ford perfected continue to produce, continue to shape the world, continue to raise the same questions about efficiency and humanity that his life raised, but never fully answered. Picture the quadricycle one more time. The crude machine Henry pushed out of a shed in 1896, the first gasoline-powered vehicle he built with his own hands. It's in the Henry Ford Museum now, carefully preserved. Visitors can see it, study it, understand it as the beginning of something enormous. 4 bicycle wheels and a gasoline engine, and a dream of going faster than horses. That machine started a cascade of consequences that remade the world. Cities reorganized around automobiles. Suburbs sprawled across farmland. Oil became the most valuable commodity on Earth. Climate changed as billions of engines burned fossil fuels. The freedom to go anywhere produced the obligation to go everywhere. Fast. Faster. Never fast enough. Henry Ford didn't intend all of this. He just wanted to escape the farm. Wanted to build machines that moved without waiting. Wanted to make those machines affordable so everyone could escape. Everyone could move. Simple motivation. World-changing consequences. Is that success or failure? Liberation or catastrophe? Both, obviously. Always both. The boy who hated horses gave us a world where horses are irrelevant, where speed is assumed, where distance shrinks and time compresses and motion is so cheap and easy that we forget it was ever difficult. And we live in that world, drive through it, take it for granted. Complain when traffic slows us down, when the pace isn't fast enough, when the system doesn't deliver what we want at the speed we expect. We're Henry Ford's children, all of us, whether we drive Fords or not. We inherited his obsession with speed, his belief in efficiency, his certainty that faster and cheaper equals better. The rain falls on Fair Lane, the candles burn out, the night becomes morning, and Henry Ford is gone, but the world he built remains, still running, still producing, still moving at speeds the farm boy dreamed of and the old man achieved, and none of us can escape. The assembly line never stops. That's what he proved. Build it correctly, and it runs forever, producing whatever you design it to produce, indifferent to whether those products liberate or harm, create or destroy. The pocket watch becomes the factory becomes the world, and we're all inside it now, moving at Henry Ford's speed, living by Henry Ford's logic, trying to figure out whether what we gained was worth what we lost. The last drive is over, the motion stops, but the momentum continues. Always forward, always faster, never looking back long enough to ask if we should have gone a different direction. Henry Ford is dead, the assembly line lives. And somewhere in America, in a factory that uses his methods, even if it doesn't carry his name, a worker is installing the same part they installed yesterday. We'll install tomorrow. We'll install 500 times a day, until their body or their spirit gives out. The cost of speed, the price of abundance, the democracy of motion, and the tyranny of efficiency. All of it, all at once, forever. That's the legacy. That's what remains when the pocket watch finally stops. Not the man, but the mechanism. Not the builder, but what was built. And it runs on, perfect and terrible, long after the hands that made it have stopped moving.